That's
clouds.
okay. Well, I guess this is it, right? We're on. We're rolling. Cameras, lights, camera, action. Welcome everybody to the Battle of the Brothers. It's the tentative title for this astrological occasion. Thank you so much for joining me. I'm Janelle Belgrave. I'll be one of your hosts today, as we'll be talking about the royal family, looking at their charts and discussing the various dramas and fires that seem to be erupting out of the House of Windsor. Today, I'm joined by my lovely hosts, Miss Kelli Glazebrook and Miss Mo Olufemi. As my fellow astrologers, we're going to be looking at some charts, most importantly, the different siblings in the royal family, and why it seems to be the case that there's always some sort of trouble between the heir and the spare, and whether or not we can get to the bottom of it, the history of it, and whether we have some predictions about what's going to happen next between the current brothers who are brawling very publicly across the pond. So I just want to thank Kelli and Mo for joining me, because I always run into them on Twitter when we're talking about astrology and the royal family. And these two ladies always pop up like, hey, what's going on? What are you talking about? And so with all the stuff that's been happening between last year and this year, with the Sussexes leaving the royal family and breaking away to start their own royal court in the US, these two ladies have been so kind to join me in discussing this, because this is our thing. We love history. We seem to have a thing for the royal family because all their charts are available. And here we are enjoying the drama against all the stars. So
yes, it's better than any reality television you can watch.
It's juicy, girl. Once you pull up a chart against an article, you're like, what's happening?
Oh yeah.
And thank you, Janelle, for inviting us to do this. It was so much fun.
Yes, thank you.
Before we start, before you start, if you guys want to talk a little bit about yourselves, or say where you're from, or what you're about, what you're into, I think that's always a fun place to start.
Okay, well, I can go first. Obviously I'm Mo. Are we sharing sun, moon, risings, SMRs?
Sure. SMRs.
I love talking about my chart. I am a Taurus sun, Sag moon, Pisces rising. I'm US born, Canada living, traditional astrologer. I've been into astrology as an adult for about 4 or 5 years, but seriously practicing for 3. And I love like the fact that almost every royal in any royal family has like a timed chart, because they document everything. And so they're good case studies if you really want to learn about astrology. No matter what anybody says, it's like learning is free and the data is there. So
I'm Kelli Glazebrook. I'm a Californian, born and raised. I grew up very religious, so I was not into astrology until later in life. But once the bug bites you, you cannot escape it. I am dipping my toes into doing more astrology professionally. I'm also a tarot reader. And I've been obsessed with British history and the royal family since I could read, because for whatever reason, when you're raised in a Christian household, history you can read is fine. So we can get all the juicy, soapy details of life through history, because the British royal family has no end to the drama that they've been involved in. So I've always just been really interested in like, what is going on with these people? And why do they just keep repeating these patterns throughout time? So I'm just super excited that we can finally tear into these charts and be like, okay, what is going on? It's super, super duper exciting for me.
And your sun, moon, and rising?
Oh yeah, I forgot. I'm a Taurus sun, and I'm a Cancer rising and Libra moon. So
awesome. You guys know me. I'm Janelle Belgrave. I've been a professional astrologer for 5-6 years now. I got into astrology around my first Jupiter return in Aquarius. So on the internet, looking up stuff, tying up my mother's phone lines back in the day. Always been really interested in UK history, because PBS and them used to play a lot of like King Henry VIII stuff, like religiously. And so as a kid, I just got addicted to how this man just like chopped up people's heads and this, that, and the other. And I was like, whoa. And then got into to historical fiction, The Other Boy Lane Girl, and it just kind of continued from there. Astrology also came in around the same time. So I didn't get into tying them together till much later though, I guess, probably around Harry and Meghan around that time. But yeah, I like it because like Mo said, it's great case studies, the times, and it's just mind-blowing. So that's why I love it so much. And if we can do some predictive work, I think it'll be super helpful. And maybe, who knows, maybe someone up top will be listening and heed our advice.
They better be listening.
You better be listening. All right. And my sun, moon, and rising, I'm a Sag sun, Sag rising, and a Pisces moon. Forgive me, it's eclipse season and I cannot think.
Yeah.
All right, so do we want to get started?
Yeah, let me put up our little PowerPoint. Hopefully coming up soon. It's weird. Sorry that it's doing that.
It's fine. Mercury is doing his thing still. He's just coming out of the shadow, right?
Yep, and Neptune is now retrograde. So
wonderful.
Isn't that wonderful?
Slipping and sliding.
It's just so slow, I feel like, right now. Everything takes so much longer. I'm like, why? Hopefully you can see that.
No,
yes,
we can.
We definitely
Yay.
can. So here we go. So how did we come together to do this to begin with? I can't remember. I think this was
like back in May. I think.
What was the big thing that happened in May? Because there's just been a series of events in the news around the royal family. So we had the Oprah interview in March, right? We had Prince Philip's passing in April. And then in May.
Because I thought we've been talking since March.
Oh, have we?
No,
no.
Well, to do this, we've been talking forever, but to do this in particular, there was something
for this.
Yeah.
It might have been William's really poor press tour post the Oprah interview, where William, at the time, his press team and him, it seemed to be very much trying to win the public over after Harry's discussion on the Oprah interview, where it seemed like every weekend he was getting dragged for something.
You know what happened in no, we might have been talking before that, but I remember in May, like Harry was doing a lot of interviews, and then like he did the Armchair Expert with Dax Shepard on his podcast, and then him and Oprah launched their project on mental health.
You cannot see, right?
The Me You Cannot See. Yeah. And I remember there was a lot going on in the media around that time. But yeah, like it's interesting. So like I love how we titled this The Battle of the Brothers. Like but something that we all noticed when we would talk about the royals and their astrology is that there seems to be this weird pattern where like there's always this like heir who's like getting like propped up to take on the throne, but like the spare is always the more interesting person. And what's interesting is that in some cases, like the person who's not expected to be, like, or ascend the throne ends up taking the throne. And so we thought that it's interesting that, the charts of these two brothers who are having a very public feud right now have some weird parallels with other charts if you stack them up against each other.
Yeah, and we're probably going to see a lot of different patterns showing up within this somewhat family tree. I think it's a continuous family tree, give or take, because we know that certain houses have taken over the years. But despite that, it just seems to be in the position of royalty. There are certain things that we're noticing in charts, whether it's exalted or planets in rulership, Saturn in certain places, Jupiter in certain places. But it's no guarantee for happiness is what I think we're discovering. Good charts, quote unquote positive charts or great planets or what have you are not a guarantee that the life lived is a either successful one or a happy one. It's just what you're given. So I think we're going to see a lot of that too.
And I think it's interesting how there's the insistence on the older, I mean, until very recently, it had to be the oldest son, right? And now it's just like, there's no consideration at all of like who's better at what and who's good at what. It's all just oldest does this, and then everyone else has to like support this person, even if like that's not what they're good at and not their role. And it's really interesting to see how that choice echoes down kind of the centuries and like just keeps seeming almost to be like compounded like the further down it goes.
And also our ideas of what support is, right? I think in present day, when we hear about support, we're like, how can we support you best to be the best at what you are? Versus this kind of support may just be, you know, keeping you protected from consequences or whatever case might be, which may not actually be support, which I think we're going to see quite a lot of.
Yeah, nobody's asking them anymore to like, you know, raise a military, but there's like a battle being waged in the press. So the shift is like, you know, interesting to watch. Like it used to be you'd have to support your sibling maybe with an army or whatever. And now it's like who can support, who can like consolidate like press reports and who can, you know, battle it out on TV. So that's interesting to see that shift too.
And it's very, I mean, I'm thankful that, you know, no one's being asked to raise an army in our present day, because unfortunately, because of the drama that has recently taken place in this family and, you know, past times, this would have been enough to start a war, quite frankly, an international war, right? We're talking about a bride being mistreated and all sorts of stuff. So, and we don't have all the details yet. So that's another thing. We have a feeling that there's a lot more happening behind the scenes than we are aware of. So all of this to keep in mind.
Yeah, and then I do want to preface our chat with obviously like we are speculating on certain things and you know we can't claim to know these people or like what's really going through their heads, but with certain themes in their charts and like the way that certain transits seem to hit these people, we can, you know, draw some pretty good inferences about what might be going on, at least publicly.
Yeah, and we're also looking at previous instances, whether in their charts or other people's charts, for, you know, backup. So this is what case studies are all about from an astrological point of view. Is like, all right, well, when's the last time this was happening or something similar, and how did the person respond? So we can kind of predict how they might respond in the future. That's basically the speculation. But we all have to say allegedly ahead of this entire exchange. So don't come for us, don't sue us. We're not trying to say this is the case. We're just looking at the astrology and, you know, kind of seeing what is possible and, you know, real for this moment in time. Okay, so are we ready to get started?
I think so.
All right, here we go. Are we Mercury? Mercury, come on,
I'm going to kill you.
Oh my gosh, Mercury, are you serious?
There it
Yay. Okay, so first chart up, we got Prince William. And Prince William was born June 21st at 1982 at 9:03 p.m. in London, UK. So if you're following along at home, definitely pull up his chart. And just to preface this, we're all using whole signs for our astrology. So if the chart that you're looking at is a little bit different, just know it's the same chart, but in a different house system. Okay.
Oh, it's very interesting. I just noticed this is a rating of B. Okay, cool.
Oh, that's me. That's because I didn't bother. Don't disregard all the B's. Everyone's going to be a B because I didn't change it.
Okay.
Okay.
More Mercury.
I was like, I thought we knew.
No, we know his time. No. So we're doing this during Mercury's last leg of his retrograde journey. So everything is a little bit messy and slippery. So everything's okay. So what did we say? What did we talk about with William's chart aside from it being extremely secretive?
I mean, it's just okay. So just between the ruler of the ascendant being in the 12th house conjunct the midheaven in the 12th house, and then like both his luminaries being in the 8th house, like this is a person who lives in the dark houses. Okay, like this is somebody who lives in the shadows, low-key, is influencing things behind the scenes, and probably wields a lot of power and influence behind the scenes. anybody who is very familiar with decans and decan imagery, that's one of my specialties that I'm bringing to this podcast. And I see that William's midheaven and his ascendant ruler, that Jupiter in Scorpio, is in the first decan of Scorpio. That's probably one of the most Martian martial places of the zodiac, because it's a Mars ruled decan. There's a Mars ruled bound in like Mars's preferred domicile or home. And this is somebody who's very power hungry. Like, there's just there's no way to put it like nicely. Like, this is somebody who wants what they want, they know what they want, and they're willing to go to extreme lengths to get what they want. What about what do you guys have to say about that?
Well, the first thing I notice right off the bat is always that eclipse.
Yeah.
In the 8th. And then I'm always like just thinking about historically how eclipses were such bad news for royals. I mean, to the point where some societies would even make a fake king for a day during an eclipse, so that that king, whatever the bad, influence from the eclipse would be, that wouldn't harm the real king. So the real king would come back later, and then if something bad happened, it would happen to the person that was king for a day. So it's always interesting to me to see Prince William's chart, because I'm always like, it's just so interesting that he was born like on an eclipse in the 8th. And it's just like, wow, that's a lot of like, yeah, that dark kind of energy that's on that chart. But it's also trine that, like you were saying, Mo, that midheaven Jupiter, and it almost seems like, someone who's really able to get their agenda going, like if they really want to, like they have that ability, like Jupiter signing off on a lot of that and letting them kind of get away with it. I also find it interesting too that he's known to have an occult book collection, just from having Sun and the Moon in the 8th. I just am like, oh yeah,
really?
okay, that makes
I did not know that.
He has an occult book collection.
Yeah, he collects occult books, and I'm like, oh yeah, okay, yeah, you can see that. And but the interesting thing to me is with that, the Neptune in the first, so close to the ascendant, I'm like, I think he's good at obscuring a lot of that. Like, I think like he, you think you're getting kind of one person, but there's like this fog over like who he really is. And so he's able to kind of keep a lot of what he's really thinking and feeling kind of hidden.
Yeah. Well, I think that would make a lot of sense too. So going back to his Sun and Moon in the 8th house, on the eclipse, so a couple of hours after the eclipse, and then technically opposite this Neptune in the first house. Sometimes I think about a lot of times the Sun and Moon, how they can represent our parents, essentially, right? So if you think that the Sun and Moon is mom and dad, then thinking about Charles and Diana, right? They had to have William, right? Because 8th house can also be the house of legacies, inheritance. So him being the legacy and inheritance to the throne, right? A lot of times with new moon birth charts, technically we say the Sun and Moon are together, so the parents must be getting along. Technically, right? They got along long enough to have him. But I definitely thought, especially what you're saying, Kelli, with that Neptune in the first house, the illusion of their relationship, right? Because even from the very beginning, this was not a happy relationship. We have to think about how this was impacting William too. I think also tying in that Jupiter trine that you were talking about, Mo, earlier, the power hungriness that both parents were kind of going through at the time of his birth, right? Because they weren't a unit, they weren't a team, but they were both struggling for power behind the scenes. And this baby picked up with those themes.
Yeah, I mean, I kind of want to touch on the Neptune a bit, just like coming from the decanic imagery of it. And so this last decan of Sagittarius is really interesting because like one of the, like, okay, this might be a bit graphic, but there is one of the images associated with that third decan of Sagittarius is like a man wearing a crown and bashing someone else's head in. And
oh dang,
there's lots of there's lots of connotations of like major endings and like managing things in a crisis, right? And so like I think William is the kind of person who does well in a crisis. A lot of his life might seem like dealing with one crisis after another, you could say. But also there's this huge, like, all or nothing. Did you miss the mark? Did you make the mark or not? It's like you can't do like 98 out of 100. It has to be 100, or else like the whole thing is lost. And like just seeing that, like not only are the luminaries like technically in a degree based opposition with Neptune and the ascendant, but like there's this principle in astrology called antisha, which has to do with the light dark relationship between different signs of the zodiac. So like um Sagittarius and not Capricorn, Cancer are contra antisha to one another. So it's like a shadow opposition because they're both like opposite, exactly opposite in terms of their relationship to the equinoxes. And so there's almost this element of like his whole, like, I guess, persona around, being do or die, or like things have to be all or none, might be kind of clashing with like the whole point of his birth, which is like to carry on the family legacy. And so there's an element of like him being born out of crisis in a sense, and maybe that's like something that's like operating in the background, like not totally in his awareness, but it might be something that's like secretly kind of pulling at him and tugging him in like different directions.
Like motivating him even though he doesn't know. Like, or isn't always
Yeah.
aware. Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, I would also probably add in, there's a lot of tension to this sun and moon dynamic too, because if you look over to his Libra house, we have Mars, Saturn, and Pluto all in Libra in the 11th house. And that Mars especially is probably going to be the tightest, and even Saturn. So Saturn is actually in the bends of his chart. So in the bends, meaning that a planet is in between or square to the nodes. So he has Saturn at 15 Libra, and his nodes are at 14 Cancer and Capricorn. So that Saturn's going to be really important in his life because it's helping him decide which way to go, essentially. So Saturn is like whether or not what kind of responsibility he's going to take on, any kind of authority he might take on, or being a part of authority structures. So in this case, Saturn, the 11th, the monarchy, the firm, this kind of collective business type dynamic that he was born into is going to be a big part. And so I think a lot of his life kind of hinges on this Mars Saturn dynamic and how it really does beat up on his sun and moon. So I don't necessarily think he wants to be king. I mean, it's his role, but I think it comes with a lot of cost that he may not necessarily want for himself anyway. It's a lot of responsibility.
Yeah. And then speaking to the Mars, like it rules that midheaven in the 12th house. And it's interesting because he like Mars is his most challenging planet since he's a day chart. Like it doesn't help that Mars is in the sign of Libra, where Mars is said to be exiled or in its detriment. And so there's this need to be very curated and appear, well put together, and to appeal to as many people as possible. Mars is more of the rugged individualist planet that does what it wants, when it wants, how it wants. But, William has to channel a lot of his like drives and rage into appeasing other people, and it might make some of his like attempts at dealing with conflict look a particular way. So like he might be trying a little too hard to be diplomatic sometimes, especially when it comes to dealing with, the perceived conflict with his brother. And then for the fact that Saturn also rules the third whole sign house, which has to do with siblings. And I think, Saturn being at the bendings is saying that, a lot of this, I feel like some of the sibling rivalry is just showing in his chart. Like,
it's somewhat kind of faded in a way.
Yeah.
And then you square that to the moon, you're like, just adding in a lot of stress to that whole thing too, because it may feel like he's being attacked when maybe he's not.
I mean, anytime I have clients with Saturn or Mars kind of square the lights, I have to tell them a lot of times, you have to be gentle with yourself, because sometimes there's a history of not receiving emotional care or behaving in ways in which their actions act against them in the long term. and so that's showing up pretty clearly in William's chart with Mars and Saturn square to his sun and moon. And it's applying because the sun and moon are going to catch up with those planets. So it's something that has grown in strength over his lifetime, I think. So I would assume, or I would think, especially around his mother's passing, that kind of Saturn meets the moon, that very cut off event. Prior to Pluto, Saturn was the god of death, I guess, to an extent, right? Chronos. So I do think we see that show up for him, that there was an emotional bluntness that happened pretty young, I'd say, and a coldness. And with such a watery chart, you would think this person would be a little bit more warm personally, but he doesn't come across that way.
Yeah, no, like, and the thing is, like, people with lots of water and air in their chart, like, so water and air are both united in their wet quality. If you look at the temperament of those like signs and elements, they want to bring things together and like make things flow. They want things to move, they want things to flow. And when you think about William, sometimes you don't necessarily see that. Another comment I wanted to make is that with whole signs, what's nice is that you have the 10th whole sign house, and then you have the midheaven, which is floating. And so the 10th whole sign house, and also the 4th whole sign house by extension, can tell us things about like what the person's family life or like career seem like. And then the midheaven can actually describe personal goals and like personal experience. And I think it's really interesting that he has this midheaven ruler in its own domicile in the 7th whole sign house, and it's actually conjunct like the fixed star Aldebaran. And Aldebaran is one of those royal watcher stars, which has connotations of integrity. And so with Mercury being there in its own sign, but also closely conjoin this like really I would say auspicious, but like with a cost star, is there's this huge thing about integrity. People, there are lots of people known for their intellect, their speaking ability, their ability to own things and command things that are associated with the star. But like, if you're not going to do the things you say you're going to do, or you like misuse your words in ways that are dishonest, there's a huge chance for a downfall. And I think that the thing is, William is actually very publicly well perceived, but having his midheaven ruler, his midheaven ruler, yes, in the 11th house, and this Jupiter can join the midheaven in the 12th. It's almost like maybe he feels that his efforts are not appreciated enough. And with that midheaven ruler conjunct an exalted Saturn, it's almost like nothing I do ever really measures up to the attention that certain relatives or even my own sibling gets. So there's this competition that inevitably happens, and you'll see that the midheaven ruler Mars is actually trying that Mercury. And so it's just like, even though he has this great like public reception and like is well regarded in the public for the most part, like it's just not enough, right?
Yeah. And you want to talk fixed stars too. We've got that Venus Chiron conjunct Algol in the 6th.
Yeah, ruling the IC.
Yeah.
Oh God,
Yeah.
like
which again can still tie into this parental theme of it, because we still have the IC in here, right? Technically, it depends. I feel like astrologers it's a toss up between the IC MC representing mom or dad, or vice versa, but to me, I'm pretty sure that has to be his mom, because again, Venus is in her own sign. Princess Diana actually had Venus a degree or two away from this same point, and we also know her ultimate fate was a beheading, essentially, in which she suffered a brain injury and passed away. So sometimes these things can be very, very, very literal, right?
When you see that, sometimes it gives you shivers. It's actually quite astonishing. And then to see William have it repeated in his chart is like, oh, okay, is this describing your mom, or is this describing, something that could, happen to you? Like you're trying to, parse that out.
And to double up, I think too, talking about what the issues that we're dealing with right now in terms of his palace, like his household, I think this is also coming up into the fold because this can be a doubling where his family life is run by these sixth house entities, right? His courtiers, his service members, whoever, that sixth house of service comes in. And Venus being on this algol point, those same people can also be a downfall for him too, I think, in the long term, you know, because algol as a point is known to be pretty pretty intense. And hopefully one day we can talk about it, but I've seen this point show up several times in history, especially during the Romanov fall. And there was another, the French Revolution was another big one, right? So this is not to say that if you have an algol point in your chart that you're doomed. That's not what we're saying. But
no, because my sun is conjunct algol, so I'm going to go
exactly.
Exactly.
So it's not necessarily that, but I do think there's an extra chance for dramatic events to happen when that planet is active and present in someone's life like this.
I do want
to
comment,
wounding, right? So
well, yeah, I feel like that's also especially the Chiron there, but like algol, like in some instances can be seen as like primordial feminine rage. And I think that there's this element of like the royal family chewing up and spitting out, you know, the female members at the expense of keeping up the monarchy. And so with Diana, for example, you see that that's exactly what happened. And so I'm wondering if the signature in the chart is just speaking to a longer instance of things that goes on in this family. I mean, Charles has points opposite this. Harry's moon is near here. So many other people in this family have points and placements near this like 24 through, or I think it's 23 through 28 degrees of Taurus. And then I also think about like what Janelle was saying about the courtiers running the life, but also just like the media, because the 11th house can also be seen as like the media, like the press and like larger society. And it's almost like that being imported into the sign that shares the degree of the IC, which says things about your home and family, is that these people are already here and they feel it and they're at home here and they're entitled to, you know, make assumptions about, you know, the private life and their experience of private life. And so there's a lot about this chart that says public and private life, there isn't like a clear boundary that exists between them, like at all.
I would think the 11th house would also be the firm itself. So including the firm, the press, the monarchy itself, you know, the fact that the ruler, even though it is in good position because it's a Libra house ruled by this Venus in Taurus in the sixth, there still is this sense of servitude around it, right? Because the sixth house can be the quote unquote house of slavery. But being enslaved to this institution, which, you know, his brother was saying, you know, he's trapped, he can't get out, you know? And so also thinking how much of this might be tied up with the downfall, not only of his household, but maybe even the monarchy too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yes.
Things to consider. So I think all this is going to unfold, especially that we have these transits heading in. I'll definitely be watching when both Uranus in Taurus and Saturn in Aquarius start to square off with that Venus, which is really funny with Saturn Aquarius, because Saturn Aquarius would be in his third house of siblings, representing the sibling. And I think that's what Harry's doing right now. He's using his receipts to slowly chip away at the monarchy.
It's always really interesting when you show up as Saturn in someone else's chart.
Yeah.
And
Harry is Saturn.
I'm Saturn for you.
Yeah,
I get it.
It's really nice because like, so what William and Harry have like with each other is something I have with my sibling, where like my sister, she's like a Cap rising just like Harry, and she is a Pisces third house. I'm a Pisces rising, and like, you know, Jupiter lives in her first house, and like I'm that Jupiter. And so it's really interesting. But William and Harry actually have it reciprocal, where William is a Jupiter ruled person and is represented by Jupiter in Harry's chart, and Harry's a Saturn ruled person represented by Saturn in William's chart. So that's like a really interesting.
You're skipping ahead, Mo. You're skipping ahead.
I mean, I want to segue though.
I want to talk about Harry now because
Let's go.
You know?
Let's see if Mercury will let us.
Yay, Harry! The son of Mercury has come through. So this is Prince Harry's chart, and he is born September 15th, 1984 at 4:20 p.m. in London, UK. And Harry is a Virgo sun, a Capricorn rising, and a moon in Taurus. So he has all three of his lights in the legs, in the earth signs. All three of his legs. There's Mercury. There you go. He has all three of his legs in earth signs. So he's a very earthy, down to earth, grounded kind of guy. And I think people have seen that from him over the years, and that he seems to be one of the guys, no matter where he goes.
What? Big earth energy.
Big earth energy. So yes. Tangible. You can touch him. So I think that no matter where he goes around the world, Harry is well received and thought of as, you know, a down-to-earth kind of guy. I think that makes sense for his chart, especially in whole signs, because he has the Sun and Mercury in the 9th house. Let's see, Jupiter on the ascendant. He's a pretty jovial kind of guy, despite having all this earth, right? If these were fire signs, this would be a little bit different, though, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, with Harry's chart, this is interesting because I just noticed that his ascendant is actually on William's North Node. I didn't realize that until today.
His North Node or South Node? His ascendant?
Oh shit, South Node. My bad, brain. South Node. That's even crazier.
Interesting.
So I don't know. With Harry's chart, it's interesting because his ascendant, just like William, his ascendant ruler is on the degree of the midheaven, and they're both in Scorpio. Like the Scorpio midheaven or Scorpio like placement thing is a huge signature within like this iteration, especially of the royal family. But as far as Harry goes, like, I mean, he has a lot going for his chart. So it's interesting how his personal experience of like his reputation is like dictated by, you know, the 11th house, which we said could be the firm, the monarchy, the institution. And I find it telling that Harry has his midheaven and his Saturn in this middle decan of Scorpio. It's very solar. It's all about coming together with other people or situations to like, you know, because you're mutually invested in something and you want to create something, but like there's this element of fighting for control over like the image of that. And like you could see it in his power struggle, especially with the monarchy and like with the press. Like, you know, he just wants to do his work in peace and he wants to connect with people, but like when the press is constantly harassing you or like putting out falsehoods about you, of course you're going to have lots of negative feelings and opinions about it, right? Also, Mars is the ruler of that midheaven, and it's also like his most challenging planet, and it's really telling that it's in the 12th house. There's a lot of resentment. Yeah, and Mars is actually in a decan it co-rules with Sagittarius, so it's like he's really
and Mars
all
also
about
rules the fourth. So
oh my god, yes, like family. It's like hidden enemies, like in his
your
family.
Hidden enemy is your family, literally.
Yes, and like the thing is, that's the very visible. So I think it's interesting that he also has the IC in Taurus, but it's his 5th house, and it's conjoined his moon, which like I know in this chart it has the calculation of the node in Gemini, but like if you use like a certain calculation of the node, he's also like a moon Rahu moon north node person. And if you think about it, like the IC and the moon seems to be like his new family with like his partner Megan, and the 4th house is like, you know, his family life with the monarchy, like and I feel like that Mars in that middle decan of Sagittarius, like ruling the 4th, is really representative of him having to like pick up and move abroad to protect his family, because that middle decan of Sag wants to protect things that it fought for. And so I think on the one hand, it does speak to some of his military work or like his charity work abroad, like protecting people from things like landmines, like his mother used to do and stuff like that. But it equally shows up as like the hostility, you know, in part contributed to by his family and their alliance with the press, and him feeling like he needed to uproot himself and get away.
Yeah. On the 12th is what, the 9th from the 4th, so literally moving your house overseas. So
yeah.
I wanted to add to what Mo was saying about the North Node. So in other, I forget, I always switch back and forth between the nodes because I can never tell which one I want to use, because there's a true node and then what, the other node, the
mean
node. There we go. So if it's in Taurus, like you explained, we can definitely see that with the family life, the children moving away to kind of create that security for himself, which I love. But even if it's in the 6th house next to Chiron, I think we see this in his actual work, him doing mental health work, especially with this Mercury up here in Virgo in the 9th house. So sharing the information that he has learned to help people improve upon their mental health, essentially, especially because that Mercury for him is square to Uranus mostly. And I think that Mercury technically would be in the Vents. It's a little bit loose, but that Mercury is pretty important for him. And it's funny because, you know, I'm really curious how they're raised as young kids and in terms of their confidence and things like that. Because I remember he was saying that, you know, when he was in school, he felt like he wasn't good at his exams, or he wasn't a good test taker, or whatever the case might be. And because of that, he's like, all right, I'll just go into the military, right? And then he gets into the military and he finds out he has to take just as many exams to do the things that he wants to do. So the whole thing about him not being smart, not being bright, wasn't actually true. So, you know, that just kind of it made me stumble, because I was like, wait, you're a prince. There should be, I would assume there are people around you and, you know, encouraging you, informing you that you are actually able to do the things that you can do. It's really odd that this family does not put a lot of emphasis on, you know, intellectual rigor or education.
I mean, it's interesting that he also described himself this way just because he's someone who has the sun rejoicing in the 9th house.
Yeah.
And he has like his lot of fortune there. And then he also has an exalted and dignified Mercury in the 9th house. And when you listen to him talk, like, you don't get that impression at all. Like, people think he's well spoken. He's really knowledgeable, and he really tries to like keep up with everything that's going on, you know? But I also think that those placements like describe, you know, like his service work and how, you know, well traveled he is. And I think that he's somebody who puts a lot of resources and energy, especially into finding like practical solutions and systemic solutions for like mental health stuff, just because of that rulership of Mercury in the 6th house as well.
I would also even link that up with his conservation work.
Oh yeah.
You know, working with animals abroad, making sure that their habitats are maintained. And then also that Mercury gets a little bit of a trine from Jupiter as well. So it's really astounding to me that he ever walked away feeling like he wasn't bright, I would say. But I do like that Anne Ortley always talks about Virgo in terms of being teachable. They want to be able to learn. So maybe if he ever felt like he wasn't bright, that Mercury in Virgo and that Sun in Virgo would have put an extra effort to kind of, you know, show up as able and capable. And I always like how Harry, when he says when he met Meghan, who's actually a Venus in Virgo, which we'll get to at some other point, how he's like, oh, I have to up my game to get with this lady, right? Like I have to extend my skill sets if I'm going to hang, essentially. So I do appreciate that about him, about Harry, that he seems to know where he's lacking and is willing to put in the work to be better.
Yeah. Also, oh wait, go ahead.
Sorry. I also think where maybe he really doesn't know kind of what's up is where that Neptune is. Like, I wonder if that obscures a lot of like where he wasn't able to see where his enemies truly were for a while.
Yeah.
Because I just see that Neptune there, and I'm always like, yeah, I don't think you had a clue until recently, maybe, that like there were people sabotaging you, you know, in very real ways.
I'm not sure if I agree. I would not that I disagree. I would probably say he wasn't aware about how on point his intuition was. Because I think Harry's always known that people are attacking him, right? Especially
that his hidden enemies he wasn't sure of. Yeah, obviously, I think he always knew the press, or, you know, he had that clear idea.
But not even that, like not even knowing who his enemies were. I just think the instinct of knowing that something is wrong, because I think he mentioned, especially in that interview, about, you know, feeling his mother around him and him not being a person to believe in that kind of stuff. But it's just like, but you have Neptune in the 12th. You can't see your own intuition. Like this is, you don't know what that is. So I do, like you said, it's not, the 12th house is so odd, you know, because the talent is there, but the person may not know how to get into it or how to tap into it. But maybe, maybe it took crossing a pond or crossing the sea for all of that to start to light up for him, which would make sense with the Sagittarius 12th house, right?
Yeah, like him having to go somewhere else to like get that kind of clarity. I think he had to leave his home in order to really see that much more clearly.
And it's interesting when his chart moves over to California, that 12th house becomes a 3rd house. So it's like all of a sudden, I'm very all the data that I couldn't see before, I can see quite clearly now.
Yeah. One of the last things I want to say about Harry's chart is that, like, and coming back to the point about the 10th whole sign house showing like what you do and what you're known for, and then like the midheaven like describing your personal experience of like your life direction and career. You know, Harry, like having Venus ruling the 5th as well, in the 10th whole sign house, like having this huge, like, you know, for one, marrying an actress is like huge, because that's not something that I mean, it's been done before and we'll get into that later, but you know, it's something that like was a big deal. And then like him like finally getting to marry for love was huge, but also just him being, again, well received by the public is like a huge thing. And so it's interesting how like his own like midheaven is actually in a tight sextile with that Venus. So like the public receives his work very well. Also, like again with his 7th house ruler, the 7th house describes like people in general as well as like your partner. Like it's that exalted moon in that last decan of Taurus. Like this dude is very, very well received by people for the service work that he does. So that doesn't.
You were saying that the midheaven ruler was trying for sextile to Venus?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Okay. Got it. Yeah. Yeah. And everyone knows about his relationship with his wife, essentially. And depending on who you are, you enjoy and receive it well, right?
Yeah.
Depending on who you are. Yeah. I like Harry's chart. I think he's done pretty well with it. Despite all the stress that has come his way, I think he's responded quite well, because he could have just abandoned her. We could have had a repeat, right? We could have had a situation where a duchess would come to the end of her life quite early, but that did not happen this time. So props to him for avoiding that timeline.
Okay.
Anything else to say about him?
Do you want to look at their charts together?
Sure. So let's see how these two brothers tick. All right. So we're looking at the synastry between them. We have William on the inner wheel and Harry on the outer wheel. So I think the first thing we all saw was the fact that Harry and William have a conjunction between their Venus and Saturn in Libra. It looks pretty different when it's William on the outside, because it's like, oh, Saturn is pressing on Venus. But that's the way I see it. It's kind of like Saturn's like, no, you want joy? You can't have that. No, me first kind of feeling.
Or like, what about like duty and honor and stuff like that? But I also feel like it's quite literally a manifestation of like Venus ruling Harry's reputation. And like I said, William's brothers represented by that Saturn. And I feel like that just really screams like Harry being well received by the people and just being more something about how he is just it just gains a lot of attention very easily. Yeah, and I feel like again this kind of feeds into the sibling rivalry that's kind of implied in William's chart, just looking at it.
Yeah, and remember for Harry, that Venus rules his 10th house and that Venus rules his 5th house. So the idea of William kind of putting this pressure on Harry's reputation, but also his romance with his wife and his creative projects, right? Because all of those things are kind of encapsulated together. The fact that Harry even works with his wife on creative projects and all that kind of stuff. And then also currently, we don't know who is pulling the strings, but currently there's an issue around whether or not Harry's children will receive their legacy and titles and birthright. So I'm wondering if it's actually William behind the scenes kind of saying, no, you can't have that either. Because that fifth house ruling Harry's kids, you know, maybe that Saturn is saying, nope, we're not going to give that over either. So there's definitely, I can see over the years, I wouldn't be surprised if there were situations where Harry's enjoying something and William might get a little bit irritated or jealous or just feel the need to kind of put cold water on things, because that's what Saturn tends to do when he hits certain planets. He tells him to stop. He puts a lot of ice on them, and that can be really upsetting for a Venus in Libra who's just trying to get along.
Right.
Yeah. It's such a chilling kind of effect, I think. Yeah.
I mean, Harry puts a very loose opposition to William's Venus too, but it's not nearly as strong.
Yeah.
And Harry has his moon on his brother's Venus, so I think there's a little bit more understanding on the other side.
Yeah.
So over the years, you know, and this is something that's a theme that's coming up too a lot, is like, oh, Harry has to come back because what would William do without him? And it's just like, I'm sorry. So this is this kind of this media theme around Harry having to be there to help William to do his job as king or whatever the case might be. And so I definitely feel that that moon on the Venus might be part of that too, or that Saturn moon situation over his brother's Venus being of perpetual kind of service to him. And behind the scenes too.
Yeah, maybe reinforced by Harry's Jupiter on William's part of fortune, kind of like, you're my lucky, you know, penny. Like I need you around to like, because you rub off on me and you make me look better and you burnish, you know, how I appear to other people. So it's like, I think that's another testimony to that.
And then Harry's Jupiter.
I always,
ascendant too. So just being around him probably boosts William up a little bit.
Him, yeah. And so he's like, you have to come back because that's how we look good.
And Harry's like, no. Maybe stop attacking my wife and children.
There's an idea.
Yeah.
I always see that Mercury square Mercury, and I'm always like, oh yeah.
That's not good communications happening.
No, like Harry's like, I want solutions, you know, like that earthy kind of like, let's get practical. And, you know, William's like, well, let me tell you the 57 points of view on this one issue, you know, and let's consider everything and let me give you this. And Harry's like, no, I want to walk away with like a plan, you know, to like make this better.
Yeah. Something else I'm also noticing is that between like the Mercury square is that also William's Libra placements are like technically contra-antition to Harry's Virgo placements. So there's this shadow opposition of like kind of working at cross purposes to what Harry's trying to do, especially the Sun and the Mars. And so like again, William's Mars manages his reputation and things like that. And so William is like maybe trying to use the press in ways to like undermine what Harry's trying to do and you know challenge Harry's legacy, which is ultimately ruled by his son, right?
It's just a lot of like working at like cross purposes or like miscommunication that's kind of gets like compounded, it looks like. But yeah, it's really interesting to see Harry's Pluto right on Will's Jupiter.
Yeah, like he triggers him in a way.
At the same time, we also know that Pluto can be a planet of unearthing things too.
It seems like receipts.
And because that Jupiter again is in rulership of William's first house and his fourth house too, and on the midheaven, this could be a very public reveal of things. So I would say to William, you have to be careful. Your brother has proven over the years to keep a lot of information on people. He said this himself in interviews.
Yeah.
I keep lists of people.
Yeah. I would think like Taurus, Scorpio, transits would be kind of triggers for those, maybe. It'll be interesting to see.
Guess where
We'll
the eclipses are
definitely
moving very soon.
We have eclipses coming into, I believe, Taurus, Scorpio, I believe in January of next year.
Actually, we get the first preview in November.
We do get the first preview in November, and it lands pretty close to William's Venus. So the first eclipse will be at 27 Scorpio Taurus, and William has his Venus at 25 Taurus. So she will definitely get that hit. And like we said, this Venus rules his 6th house, and the Venus rules his 11th house. So things around those two things are going to shake out. And I do think it has a lot to do with Kensington Palace and how things were run.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think some stuff's going to come out about, like what's happening with all of the press, like contacts, the Royal Rota, all that kind of stuff is like definitely going to be maybe having its time in the sun, which he maybe would rather not.
Yeah.
Well, Shadow. We were calling him the Shadow King at one point.
I mean,
Yeah.
the energy is there. Like
Yes.
he's got like the puppet master running the strings kind of energy with all those like first deck and water placements and dark houses,
Yeah. It's interesting.
Anything else about these two?
No.
No, we should probably start looking. Did you want to start looking at history?
Yes.
Oh, yes.
When things get juicy.
Oh, and I just wanted to put these cute pictures in. Look at how adorable.
Oh, so
Their little uniforms. Yeah, the air and the spare. I think just, setting up that air and the spare dynamic is always just going to be trouble.
It undermines the two of them.
Yeah, and their relationship. Anyway, okay. Ooh.
Bloody Mary. So jumping back into history, we're like, all right, what other siblings have had issues over the years when it comes to this crown? And we thought of Queen Mary I, or Bloody Mary. And we also thought of her younger sister, or her younger half sister, Queen Elizabeth I. Right? So, poor Mary. Oh, Lord.
Yeah.
What a tough life. And then to be called Bloody Mary in the after, I mean, she deserved that, but still. So
also, I just think it's funny they called her Bloody Mary, because I'm like, didn't she burn people? Shouldn't you call her Bernie Mary?
So the rumors at the time was that she, there was so much religious hostility in the UK at the time between Protestants and Catholics. Mary was one of the lingering Catholics of the land after her father had pretty much become the King of England. So to get into power, she had to essentially reassert Catholicism to an extent in England. And that came at a very bloody price, because instead of just saying everyone practice what you feel like, she was like, no, all y'all have to die who are not Catholic. So, so the rumor also came about that she was using the blood of virgins to bathe and to preserve her youth. And I think that's partially where the Bloody Mary situation came.
It did not work.
It didn't work. And it probably wasn't true. But yeah, let's look at her chart. So one thing we see right away, Capricorn rising and a Scorpio midheaven.
And a full moon.
A full moon chart. What's going on? All right. So, I mean, I haven't spent a lot of time with her chart. I think it's interesting that Virgo repeats here again with her moon. We have an exalted Jupiter in Cancer. We have Mars exalted in Capricorn. And we have Venus exalted in Pisces. So this is a chart that's, got some good juice involved.
It's got a lot of juice.
It's got a lot of juice, but it was not an easy life.
No. Well, you see that ascendant between Pluto and Mars.
I would assume it wasn't an easy birth either, because
No.
a lot of times we hear about the first house with troubling planets sometimes can talk about the birthing being really hard. And we do know that her mother did not have any more children after her.
Yeah. She's
So
like literally between a rock and a hard,
between
fiery
hell
place.
and hell.
Yeah.
Between Hades and hell. There you are.
Literally.
Let's see. We have Saturn in the 12th house. So the ruler of the first house is in the 12th house. not exactly the most happening place for that ruler, but Saturn joys in that house, right?
Yeah, and it's like in a pretty tight square with her 10th whole sign house ruler, which is that that exalted Venus. Like
Venus,
so
yeah.
So, I mean, we do know that over the years, there's a lot of finagling and politicking and shadow politicking.
Well, and she was isolated for years from court.
Right? She was in a tower for a couple of years. She was isolated from her mother, right? This full moon is beautiful because we know eventually that her mom and dad were in perpetual separation, right? And was her mother exiled in a different country or no? Was she?
I think
No,
so.
she was in England, but she was further away from Mary, and they didn't see each other like for years. And her mother passed, and they never reunited. So,
was her mom in a monastery or no?
No, she was in like some noble person's house, I think, like being watched over.
So I was just asking because that 9th house, but I think the 9th house might be more about her mom's
religion.
She was very religious, right?
Yeah.
And her dad wasn't into it. He was like, I want a baby boy and I'm gonna put you out and marry someone else. And that next person was Anne Boleyn. And that will lead us to her sister, her younger sister, Queen Elizabeth I.
Oh, and I also do think that it's interesting she had that Jupiter retrograde in the 7th, because that marriage did not produce like what she was hoping it would.
But also that Jupiter in the 7th is the ruler of her 3rd house. So who had the longer reign?
Her sister.
Her sister. Who was more beloved? Her sister, judging by that Sun and Venus in that 3rd house.
And her sister's not named Bloody Elizabeth.
No. Elizabeth I was born September 7th, 1533, 2:54 p.m. in Greenwich, England. And she too is a Capricorn rising, the same degree of her sister, a Virgo sun, and the moon in Taurus. So,
who does this remind you of?
Shh, don't give anything away. Very, very similar to a chart that we were just looking at. But what does this chart say? Let's see. Well, what was the thing that stood out the most to me in this chart when I was looking at it? Well, one, I remember that she never married, right? Technically, she never married.
Yeah.
She has Saturn and Uranus in that 7th house. So I think that would talk about the delay and also the how unusual it was for a queen to not marry at that time.
I think also maybe it speaks to how she was rejected when she was born, since it rules that ascending.
Yeah.
Like as soon as she came out, they were like, bye.
For a time, for a little while, she was fine. Then,
for like about a year. And then afterwards, they're like, yeah.
Oh, gosh. And so, but what was interesting, though, is that her 5th house is in Taurus, like Prince Harry. The moon is exalted in that house. And I was thinking about her lovers, how she had lovers. And usually those lovers were known because the ruler of this 5th house is in the 10th house.
Everyone knew.
Everyone knew about her lovers. Everyone knew about her lovers. And thinking about how sometimes those lovers had issues, typically in the long term, because it was square to that 7th house, right? So
I'm also thinking of that, of like kind of like the cult of personality that sprung around her regarding like her being the queen. Like she had portraits made and all kinds of things, like celebrating kind of like her femininity as kind of like a way to like gain power. And it's that Venus in the 10th, I think.
Yeah, and I'm also thinking about like how the arts and stuff flourished under her, like Shakespeare and like theater became huge like during her reign. And she's credited for bringing like a sense of culture back to England.
Well, they named it the Elizabethan age.
I also think that Venus was really, that's an opposition too, right? Venus is loosely opposite to Neptune down there. Very loose. Coming out of it. So also thinking about, the story she created around herself, like the whole when I'm a virgin, I'm the virgin queen, and the makeup and the dress, like all of that. A lot of acting involved. Especially because that sun is also opposite that Venus, that Neptune too. So we do see that quite a bit in the charts of actors. You know, and being queen essentially is a job. You have to act a particular role, but once you take that wig off, as she's very much known for her wigs, she was just a regular girl, right? So
yeah,
like
I see that that Mercury trine Mars, and I know she had a quick wit.
She was
She
celebrated.
could cut you down.
Cut you down. Jupiter in the 12th. I like that Jupiter in the 12th because oftentimes I've heard that Jupiter in the 12th can act like a guardian angel.
Yeah,
So
for
this
sure
one
it
thing
did.
seemed absolutely like, this is it, kid. Jupiter will swing by in the last minute to kind of change things around. He's in his sign of rulership too. So just thinking about when she was in that tower for X amount of months and years, you know, being the spare bastard born, you know, taking out the line of succession, the whole 9 yards, and somehow she ends up on the longest reigning queens.
yeah.
So-
I think it's also
It's a
telling
saving
that her
grace.
sibling is that Jupiter as well. And
Yeah.
you know, her sibling had it out for her for a while.
For sure.
Like,
It's interesting because when you hear about them, sometimes they talk about the sisters were friendly to each other, like they liked each other, like the siblings were actually fine. It was the politics around them that really ruined their relationship, and I think that's what we're seeing again in modern day.
That sounds familiar.
It does sound familiar, right? Like, because if we were to put those two charts together and put their synastry together, they actually have a really sweet sun moon conjunction. Well, it's not a tight one, but you know, her sister's moon is in her sun sign, right? At minimum.
yeah.
So,
And they have moon trines.
there is an age gap between them though, so I can see how that might play in. Anything
well, it's also said that Queen Elizabeth quite liked Mary, Queen of Scots, but she ended up cutting her head off. So
yeah, it does seem like she was
politics
fairly reluctant to doing some of these things. At least that's how it sounds. His history says it, but I don't know. Well, I guess.
Interesting.
What about this midheaven ruler Saturn in the 7th? So again, kind of feeling like her image wasn't necessarily her own all the time. A lot of different people might have had a hand in her ultimate image, I guess, in the long term.
I think that bears out because she did have quite a lot of advisors over her lifetime who were men who would try to push her kind of one way or the other towards war, against war, for reform, not for reform. And she was, you know, always kind of having to juggle those people and also like come up with her own point of view.
That makes sense with Saturn Uranus. I see that a lot with like reformers, you know, Saturn structured, Uranus upheaval, putting together, hopefully get some decent reform. And how many of those advisors turned into lovers because that Saturn is ruled by that moon?
Well,
so that was a complication for her.
Yeah.
Some of those advisors.
She'd end up having to exile some of them, and you know, it became a thing. She wasn't good at separating politics and her love life. Let's just put it that way.
Yeah, well, we can see why it was very much intertwined, right? So I guess it was ultimately a wise choice that she did not marry. Now, it's interesting, she didn't have any children, which is interesting because she does have that fairly fertile moon in the 5th house. Venus, did she not have any children? This is when astrology starts to contradict some of the stuff though. So you're just like...
I mean, if she did, she hit it so well.
If she did,
I mean, she like, But it could also be the fruitfulness of all of the culture that she kind of did because she was so responsible for all of that.
That's true. I could definitely see that. But if she did have a secret baby, I could see how it would play out in this chart because the ruler of the 5th Venus is opposite to Neptune. So if you need to vanish something, you need Neptune.
So another thing is just the fact that like her midheaven is ruled by that Mars, and Mars is actually in its own decan in the 6th house. Like a lot of her foreign policy, for example, was centered around like protecting England's assets and like trade and things like that. And so I'm wondering, and also there's like a lot of emphasis on like moral dilemmas and things like that in that middle decan of Gemini that comes up. But yeah, like there was a lot of, I guess, as much as there was cultural flourishing, there was also some like military flexing
Oh, sure, yeah.
going on with her reign.
Where she got saved again by weather, interestingly enough. when the Spanish Armada came for them, like they didn't even have to fight. They didn't have to do anything, just like a big storm, and she's like, oh, okay, I win.
That's so funny. I there's this book series that I love, the All Souls trilogy.
Oh yeah, with Harkness.
Yes. So I love how they've kind of that scene with the Spanish Armada, how they made it seem as though it was witches who made the storm to crash the ships. I really appreciated that. So
well, that's the opposite house with Jupiter, isn't the 12th house like
some
witchcraft?
Powerful forces.
Yeah.
Also, similar to Prince William, she has the North Node in the 8th house as well. So again, kind of bringing back the idea of legacy and inheritance. And for her, it's actually in the sign of royalty, Leo, right? So for her, she was able to continue the Tudor line a little bit longer, despite all of the different things I should have said otherwise.
And also she was really into astrology. Yeah, she had that astrologer John Dee, who was super famous, and I'm pretty sure he picked her coronation time and day.
That I did remember that. So maybe next time maybe at some point we'll look at coronation charts and see if we can divine anything there. But I actually like Queen Elizabeth's history when I read about it or watch any documentaries. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, she's an interesting person.
Yeah. Who's next? What's we doing? The sisters?
Yeah, so it's interesting when you put them against each other. You had the first queen, Queen Mary. She was the first queen who ruled on her own right. And then you have the unexpected queen, which was Elizabeth I, who I don't think people were thinking would ever reign, but ended up, being one of the most celebrated British monarchs of all time. So you get those repeating patterns of, the first one and then the unexpected one.
Interesting to be called Good Queen Bess. There's another good monarch who has a name like that. All right.
And so, you can almost just look at one and the other. I'm just kidding.
Yes. So clearly we've been hinting all this time at who these people are, and it's Prince Harry who has the chart most similar to Queen Elizabeth. Right. So as you can see, they both have a Capricorn rising. They both have the sun in Virgo. They both have Venus in Libra. They both have the moon in Taurus. And I think that's the end of their overlaps. I'm pretty sure.
Venus and Libra.
Yes. And the midheaven in Scorpio as well.
Yeah.
Similar degrees.
So their suns are in similar degrees too, in that third decan of Virgo, which is all about longevity and legacies. It's like, has what I built outlast me? What comes after this? And there's this huge, especially with the sun rejoicing in the 9th house, like there's this element of being aligned, like having this aligned purpose, projecting that to the world comfortably and confidently, and creating a legacy that outlasts you. Honestly, like Queen Elizabeth I did a lot for England culturally, and her influence over English culture is still felt to some extent, or paved the way for other lasting changes in England after her reign.
And I think we see that, especially because that Virgo sun and house is ruled by this Mercury in Libra. So the arts being the main focal point. Versus Harry, his ruler of the sun in that house is Mercury in Virgo in that house. So I think we might see a slightly different dynamic here, where she's more art-centric and he's probably more healing, conserving, improving upon, or editing.
Yeah.
This could also be editing the press too, which is kind of his enemy at this point. Right.
Yeah. But it is striking when you look at the similarities to their chart.
What else? They both have the moon in Taurus in the 5th house. So we discussed that Elizabeth did not get married ultimately, but she did have multiple lovers. So I don't think she was ever lonely. I think the same could be said about Harry. However, where's her Saturn? Her Saturn's in part. So she had more multiple lovers. I think he's had more long-term relationships than she has. He has a fixed Saturn ruling his 7th house. Yeah.
No, he has she has like, okay, so the way I learned it was that you look at the modality of Venus, the 7th house ruler, and then the descendant. And so she has like everything except the moon cardinal. And then Harry has like, I mean, he has that too, but then he has a fixed Saturn. Like his ascendant ruler is fixed, whereas hers is cardinal. So like there's just this like changeability there that seems to be implied.
So when Harry has dated over the years, they tend to be long-term relationships. We know their names. They seem to be in good standing still with the public and with him. So I feel like that's a slightly different story than Elizabeth, where her lovers tend to be exiled.
Yeah, and then I think like looking at the moon conjunct the IC, like the IC can also say things about like the end of your life. And so like having the moon exalted there seems to be like indicative of like being well received by the public in death and well remembered by the public long after you've passed. And so that feels really symbolic.
As we know, or if you don't know, we just saw that Queen Elizabeth had the Good Queen Bess nickname, and it's been told that Harry has the nickname Good King Harry from his mother, Princess Diana. So there's this idea that's been floating around for a number of years that Harry might be better suited for the role of king than his brother, according to his mother. Now, looking at these two charts, I think we're starting to see why. There are a lot of similarities between a monarch who has already ruled for a long period of time and was received well by the public. Okay.
Yeah, and you have to remember too that nobody really expected Queen Elizababeth to be queen.
Absolutely
Just like no one really expects Harry to have any kind of that type of influence. So it's just interesting to see, that it is a possibility, I think.
It's so funny because Elizabeth was supposed to be a son and Harry was supposed to be a daughter.
Yeah, that's right.
So it's interesting that both of these children were expected and wanted to be something different by their parent, and yet ended up being the opposite of such thing in various ways.
Yeah.
So she was never supposed to be a ruling monarch. She was supposed to be a son. He's a spare, not supposed to be king, and yet is receiving the attention of a king.
Yeah.
Righto. Anything else about these two?
No.
Okay. Moving right along. Next, we have Bloody Mary against William. I'm joking. No, because William now has nicknames on the internet that are not as pleasant as Good King Harry. And a lot of it has to do with bullying, unfortunately. I didn't really see many similarities between these two, personally.
No.
Not really.
It's interesting though to see that, that Queen Mary does have a few things in common with Harry. The rising.
And then Jupiter. Anything?
I mean, the only thing these two really have going right now is like it's just like that first decan Cancer stuff. For Mary, that seems to be like tying into, I guess, like family stuff, just because like the third house is ruling that Jupiter, or ruled by that Jupiter, sorry, and so is the 12th. And like because it rules those two things and it's importing that into the 7th house, like maybe there was some self-undoing or downfall around like her partnership that had consequences for like her rule, her connection to relatives and things like that. But I think it also shows the stake and claim that ultimately her sister, maybe other like half siblings and like cousins might have had to the throne. It is opposite that Mars, which does rule her midheaven, and so her whole energy. Like, so when I see the ruler of the midheaven in the ascendant, like, it's like, okay, the authority comes to you. Like, yes, she's earned the authority, but like she also has to fight really hard to keep it, because there's other people who have just as good a claim in ruling, even though, you know, ultimately right now the authority rests with her. And then,
well, she did have to depose Lady Jane Grey, who, you know, who took over after her brother died, and
yeah,
she beheaded her. So
yeah, she just had to. But then, yeah, I don't know, like, it's just they don't really have as much in common, except that, like,
And also that third house ruler being exalted. So
yeah,
kind of bringing in the image again of the sibling being better received than they are.
oh yeah, like that's right, because Saturn is like whatever, like, yeah, she got the authority and it got given to her and she had to fight for it, but like she lives in that 12th house, like she's not really seen. And I guess they do have that in common, where the ruler of the ascendant is in the 12th house, so it's not seen, but the influence is like wielded and felt anyway. So like, yeah, they do have that Mars third house ruler tension, but I think that for her it was like a straight up opposition and she had to like fight guns blazing, whereas it almost feels like Harry and William are trying to do the same things. Like his like conceptions of what he needs to be doing is similar to what his sibling is doing, and like there's the tension of trying to do the same things, whereas like with Mary, it's just like, I have this approach. Like, for example, we see that with her Catholicism. Like, I have this approach. This is what I think things need to be in terms of like religion and things like that. And, you know, my sibling has this other approach, and them like doing battle to see who gets to retain their influence over society.
Okay. Well, so it looks like in these two, the most similar things is that Cancer, Decan, like you said, the ruler of the first house being in the 12th, and the ruler of the third being exalted. So them not being seen particularly well or at all in the public eye, and their sibling being well received. And so I think we can see how that tension is showing up.
Yeah.
Especially.
Yeah, and the one born on an eclipse and one born on a full moon is just interesting.
Yeah. Interesting. Okay. Anything else about these two?
No.
Okay. Moving right along. All right. So we're moving to a different set of siblings. I don't know which is worse. So we're going to be talking about King Edward, or David, as I like to call him. Edwards and Georges, and I'm just like, all right, David. This is one of Queen Victoria's great grandsons, roughly,
something like that,
somewhere in there. He as well was the firstborn and expected to be king. He was born on June 23rd, 1894 at 10 p.m. in Richmond, England. And let's see, he is also a Capricorn rising, a Cancer sun, and the moon in Pisces. So this is a different one, having the moon in Pisces.
Yeah, the moon in Pisces is definitely different.
It's kind of a rare one in this family, I feel like. Okay, so there's a lot of things that jumped out about his chart to me, but I love Mars and Aries on the North Node in the 4th house, and then Saturn on the South Node in the 10th. So already seeing this karmic situation around family independence and this sense of duty to his reputation too.
Yeah.
And Mars can also be scissors to cut things away. So what is he known for? Breaking up the family.
Yeah, like,
he cut shit up.
Yeah, if anyone doesn't know, this is the king that abdicated. He didn't even reign a year.
Did not reign a year.
And this
also,
was the current queen's uncle.
Yes.
So yeah.
So because of this uncle abdicating, Queen Elizabeth is on the throne because her father ended up taking his place. The other thing too in this chart, aside from that Mars and Saturn, is the sun is in the 7th house in between the nodes. So ultimately it came down to a romantic, well, in this case, a romantic relationship that was the pivot point for him to choose to step up or to step down on his faith.
Yeah. Also, like, again, there's that midheaven in the 12th action, and this midheaven is ruled by that a Jupiter that isn't the happiest in the 6th house in what's it called, in Gemini, and it happens to rule the 3rd house, and so again his sibling got passed the role because he didn't want to take it.
The sibling got passed the role, and the sibling started to suffer health issues because of it.
Yeah.
And died
And
early as a result.
We also see that Venus in Taurus in the 5th, and he was a known playboy.
And it's on Algol.
Yeah, on Algol.
Yeah, it's also ruling his 10th whole sign house, which is again, he married an actress. That was huge.
He married an actress, and he was beheaded because of it, right? Essentially, technically.
Lost his role. Yeah.
Lost his role. And there's something else about that Venus. I mean, she's on Algol, right? So again, that kind of beheading dynamic, but you know, she's in her own house, so he was beheaded for falling in love, essentially, and because of who she was.
Yeah, it's quite striking when you look at it.
She was the reason why he lost his crown, essentially, right? What else is in the chart? But I do like, I mean, not that I like it, but that Jupiter in Gemini next to Neptune and Pluto, you know, Jupiter representing his brother. So, you know, we know that his brother had a stuttering issue, right? Jupiter not in the sign that he likes. He's in Gemini, can't handle all the words. Next to Neptune, kind of having his struggles with kind of asserting himself and his image, and then Pluto too. So I definitely do think that that kind of does speak about his brother taking on the role, struggling with it, and then also ultimately dying fairly young from it too. Because Pluto is all tied up in there as well.
And then I see like Jupiter and Saturn are actually in a really tight trine with each other. And so that's kind of like, you know, him basically passing it on to his brother. Like, hey, it's all you.
There you go.
Also, didn't his brother Bertie, Albert, didn't he die from lung disease?
Yeah, which is Gemini. Yeah.
Gemini rules the lungs. Okay, yeah. All right. Yeah. Anything else about this chart?
I think so.
I was laughing because I was thinking, oh, you know, like William with his MC in the 12th house, this could be someone who does work really well behind the scenes and secretly. And then also the ruler of that midheaven, the 12th, is Jupiter in Gemini. So possibly good at collecting evidence or details or working in a you know, kind of service kind of situation. And then also, who else? There was something else in this chart that I thought was pretty good that made sense, but ultimately think about him working as a spy. And then also using the press and media to kind of use to do that spy kind of work.
Well, yeah, he did. He went behind his government's back to consort with Nazis. So there you go.
And since Jupiter is not in good position and next to Neptune and Pluto, he was also cut off for doing so. Did not end well for him. Okay, well, that was fun. Who's next?
Next. So his brother, who became King George VI.
King George, and this is Bertie. This is the younger brother. I didn't know that they were so close in age.
Very close.
A year and a half away in age. I thought they were much further apart. So maybe that talks to how different in temperament these two were. Because David, who's the older brother, always seemed to be a lot more younger and maybe a little bit more irresponsible versus the younger brother who seemed more responsible. So Bertie was born on December 14th, 1895 at 3:05 a.m. in Sandringham, England. He is a Libra rising, Sag moon, and a moon in Scorpio. So,
Yeah, no, like I'm also just thinking about how some of the health issues can be like seen through him having his ascendant ruler in its detriment in Scorpio. Um excuse me.
Mhm.
And then also like the square with the third house ruler in Leo, just kind of like,
Mhm.
Jupiter separating, well, the midheaven is applying to Jupiter, but like it's like ahead of it. And it's almost like the sibling passing on duties to him, if that makes sense.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah. In terms of his health, that definitely stood out to me because if you look at his chart, he's born when the moon is waning towards the sun. It's kind of balsamic, kind of new moon, almost a new moon chart. And the moon is in a weakened state in Scorpio as well. And also with Uranus and Saturn and Venus. The other thing too that I don't feel like Scorpio gets a lot of attention is that it is still a water sign and it does accumulate a lot of psychic and emotional energy very easily, you know. And so I'm just thinking about his life, his stutter, his anxiety, the household that he was born into, and then having all of this Scorpio stuff just sucking up all of that, tension essentially.
Yeah.
And how that must have played a role, in his life really ending very, very early. I think he died a good 20 years ahead of his brother.
Yeah.
But yeah, this in terms of the moon and sun, kind of declining in light, he didn't have a lot of energy at all in life, I would think, to really fend off from the stress, I would think.
Yeah.
That's what I was thinking.
I think that's why he smoked so heavily, for sure. Yeah. Trying to mitigate some of that tension.
Yeah.
It's interesting to see the seventh house ruled by Mars, because it was said that his wife was really the soldier of the family, and like she was like, I think they called her something like, what was it, like something like an iron like wrapped in marshmallow, like she had this outer opinion, like
fist in an
she
iron,
looked like, yeah,
fist
an
in
iron fist and a velvet glove. Yeah.
I always thought she was like a battle axe because she was also Scots. She was a Scotland.
Right.
Scots.
Right.
Scot lady.
Scots.
So the Scots are a little bit more not pushy, but they're a little bit more direct, I would say. So
I just found that really interesting.
Yeah, sturdier stock, as they would say. If Elizabeth got her, if his daughter got her like earthiness, it was probably from the mother's side of the family, I think.
I think so, yeah.
Because they lived in the countryside in Scotland.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and also this Venus and Moon in Scorpio, is this talking about his wife and his mother, or who was running the show really? Because I feel like his wife and another female figure were more powerful than he was.
Oh yeah,
behind
his mother
the scenes.
was Mary of Tech, and I think she was a battle axe.
Yeah,
for sure.
Yeah.
And like ran like everything with an iron fist as well.
Mm-hmm. I mean, as far as historically, I think that both of his parents were pretty difficult, including his father. And I definitely think that shows up in this chart. We have Moon in Scorpio, Venus in Scorpio, and then we also have the Sun in Sag opposite Pluto and Neptune. It's pretty loose, but it's there.
It's there. No, and the sun is in that last decan of Sagittarius, which I talked about, the imagery of literally someone with a crown bashing someone's head in. Like it's brutal energy.
You say this as I have that decan in my chart.
It's brutal energy. It's like, look, I mean,
really?
And I think, looking at the fact that the sun rules that midheaven, and that midheaven's in that like Saturn sun ruled decan of Leo, which is all about like all eyes on you. And it's like you have to prove something. You have to show like the best parts of yourself and prove something. Meanwhile, he's kind of inheriting this position from his brother. It's almost like not like, king killing in the traditional sense where like, someone's like harming a king, but it's like the loss of king. You have to replace like the king that's gone now. Like your brother got sacked from the role and here you are. And it's like,
and then you have to like try to restore it, because after Edward VIII abdicated, it was like, everyone's like, well, why do we have this? Like, what's going on? Like,
yeah. And basically it was like, if you think about the tarot card associated with that last decan of Sag, it's like, you know, you carrying a bundle of things and you have to basically carry everything on your back. He had to carry the monarchy on his back, and it made
Ten
him
of
sick.
Wands.
Yeah.
It's
Like-
interesting because that Jupiter rules his sixth house, correct?
And
His third. So I like to look at Sabian symbols,
Mm.
especially when I feel like there's some things to some degrees that kind of stand out. And his Jupiter is at 835 Leo. So technically we would read for the 9th degree next over. And that degree at 9 Leo is called glass blower shape. Glass blowers shape beautiful forms with their controlled breathing, right? So kind of creating something out of nothing, for example. And I would think that's what they had to do to save the monarchy. I was like, well, kid, you're up. Like, let's make it happen. But also the caution is failing to take proper care, lapses of concentration, distortions of the truth, hyperventilation, lung troubles, asthma, and smoking too much. So when we say that astrology is very, 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 very literal, this is why.
There you go.
So, I mean, yeah. So, I mean, in the future, I would love to do some timing charts. I think that's always a lot of fun. We can time when he was told that he's going to become king, when his health started to fail, when he died, all that stuff we can probably see in this chart with all of this stuff.
For sure.
Anything else about that?
No.
Okay.
I just liked this little thing. So it's just like the year of 3 kings. So the king died, this king abdicated, and then this new king came in. And that was like, it was a turbulent time. Like there was a lot of, you know, constitutional crisis talk, and there was a lot going on. And this was like, you know, it was unprecedented, really. So it was quite the meat grinder year for the monarchy.
Oh yeah, and it's interesting because your Uranus is in Taurus now, just like it was back then.
Yeah.
And now Pluto is in Capricorn as opposed to Cancer, was it where it was back then?
Yeah.
That Pluto and Cancer may have saved them that appeal to, you know, family type thing. I don't know.
When Birdie ascended the throne, it was in December, roughly?
I think so.
December 36. So even back then, the North Node was actually in Sagittarius. So it's interesting that we're having the inverse right now.
The reverse.
Another monarchical crisis.
Ho ho. Right. So
here we go.
David and William. So can we spot any of the patterns here? They're both Cancer suns.
Early degree.
Same decan.
Same decan. They both have Venus almost in the same degree, 2 degrees off from one another. Let's see.
Exalted Saturn.
Same Saturn placement.
Both have 12th house midheavens.
William has a stronger Jupiter here, though, right?
Yeah, that may be William's grace.
Well, he has a lot of protection, right?
Yeah, he really does.
A lot of protection.
Because it looked like David was just kind of out there on his own.
David didn't have the appeal of, you know, the courtiers, I guess, or, you know, his dad Loki kind of hated him.
His dad was not a fan. Let's just put that lightly.
Not a fan, which is not easy.
No. His dad said within a year he would ruin himself and the monarchy.
Granted, his dad was probably a little bit of an asshole, but
his dad wasn't wrong either.
His dad wasn't wrong either.
No.
Well, kind of mean, but not wrong. But you know, I would love to look at his chart too, because I think I was like, oh, bro, get out of here.
He was a piece of work.
He was, yeah. I would love. See, we didn't do his chart with his cousin. He's lucky. Next time, though.
Next time, yeah.
Anything else?
I'm trying to think about what stands out. I mean, they both have that Sun Mars square going on for them, except William has like the Libra Mars, and Edward / David has the Aries Mars.
They almost have the same they almost have the same situation.
Almost, but like instead, like, you know, Edward has the, you know, sickly brother who ends up taking over, whereas William has a really popular brother he is trying to compete with.
Yeah, you can see that, like that Jupiter in Edward or David's chart ruling the third. Not as happy.
Not as happy.
No.
Not happy at all. So where Edward has this T-square, a rough T-square between Mars, Saturn, and the Sun with the nodes, William doesn't quite have a T-square, but there's the beginnings of it with the same planets. Sun, Mars, and Saturn with the nodes. So what's the story is the question.
So what I think is that, like, obviously with the Saturn in Edward's chart, like being in the 10th, being exalted, like dude clearly had, I think if he really wanted to, he could be king, like, and it would be fine, especially because Saturn's like really close to the exaltation degree. Like he would be fine, but like the way he wanted to do things was contrary to, you know, the family establishment, which is that 4th house, Aries, and what the courtiers and, you know, the public expected, which is that 11th house. Like he was just not with the agenda, and they were in a position where they could tell him, no, we're not doing this, you're not marrying this chick, you're not bringing this to the family, and you're not gonna, I guess, quote unquote, embarrass us like that. And so you could see like the Sun being in the 7th whole sign house ruling the 8th, which has to do with legacies and inheritance, and Mars squaring that is like him getting cut off from what is arguably his birthright. Like he got cut off from it.
I mean, and he really got cut off. Now, he was exiled, but they did, what island they placed him on? The Bahamas?
They sent him to Bermuda because they were afraid he was going to be spying during the war.
Okay, so it was an exile, but it was still a pretty comfortable exile.
Oh, he was fine.
He was fine. He just was, and I think he tried for the rest of his life probably to get back in their good graces.
Oh yeah, he thought that he would only have to be exiled for a year or two and then he could come back. He never lived in England again. He died in France.
And I think that kind of shows up in his chart more so than Harry's, I would say, most likely.
Or William? Oh, Harry's. Oh.
So just thinking about their exiles, you know.
Sure.
I think Harry's chart is more primed for a life abroad anyway. So I don't know if an exile was ever really going to be an exile for him. Versus this guy, you know,
was kind of forced into it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think he necessarily wanted it, whereas I don't know if it bothers Harry as much.
No, I don't think it bothers Harry at all.
I mean, will we compare this dynamic to William though? Because I feel like there's way more in common with William's chart. Like, I mean, the ascendant ruler isn't doing that hot. It's like in the 12th, it's not really, I mean, it's doing great things to the sun and the moon, but like otherwise it's not really in shape to do much. And there's almost this element of me wondering, like, if at some point what William will be remembered for is having to be, I guess, like exiled in a way. Like there's this like connotation of possibly like even missing out on the title or like the perks that come with the title, even though he like works so hard to, you know, protect it and reap the benefits of having the title. Like I don't know if it's going to, you know what I'm saying? Like I just don't think it's going to be there or stay there. That's just something I'm speculating.
And that's something we can definitely look at, and probably even to the next generation. We're talking about William's children and even Harry's children. Which
will there even
charts,
be a monarchy at that point?
Yeah,
Well, when I see George's chart, not to get too ahead, but when I see George's chart, I don't see a chart of someone who wants to be king. And it feels like the chart got all the way up to because he's like a last degree Cancer sun. And so it's just like, are you sure? And he's like, nope, definitely don't want it. I will be a Cancer sun. So I kind of feel like this is coming to a closing at this point.
Yeah, like it's wrapping up.
It's wrapping up. Anything else between these two gentlemen? No? Okay. And here is George VI, or Bertie, against his great grandson, Harry.
I don't remember a whole lot that was similar, but yeah.
I mean, just them having the same Saturn placement is pretty loud. And then I'm trying to think what else is going on.
We were talking about how sometimes, or it seems like people who have fairly significant Sag placements in this family don't do too well within them.
They don't do very well.
They don't. So we know that George has Sun, Mercury, Mars. Harry has Mars, Uranus, South Node, and Neptune. Diana had the rising. William has the rising. So there are some themes around the Sagittarius energy is not too into being cooped up inside these palaces with these rules and regulations.
Yeah. And Harry has that.
Didn't you talk too about there was a previous like Duke or something that was a Sag?
Oh, Gloucester. The Duke of Gloucester.
Yeah. William, Duke of Gloucester. So he was also a Sagittarius sun and moon. He worked in, I believe, the embassy in Japan, lived and worked abroad for a while. The whole family was like, okay, I guess. Fell in love with a flight attendant, and they were like, absolutely not. And ultimately, he died in a plane crash. Very young, very early. So there seems to be a theme.
Yeah, these themes of Sages,
Sages tend to kind of flicker out a little bit earlier than others in this family. So we'll definitely be watching.
I think it's also like more so the third decan Sagittarius placements, because that seemed to be a consistent theme. It's like a light going out. And I'm just thinking of the fact that Harry has like his Mars is near George or Bertie's Mercury in that middle decan of Sagittarius. I mean, for Bertie, like it's just like, okay, the house of siblings has like the seventh relative to the third is in like what would be the first. So it's like, again, problematic sister-in-law, like making me responsible for carrying the monarchy on my back, maybe at the expense of my health, and like people having issues with that marriage being and that being a thing, and then also like in Harry's case it's just like the opposite issue where it seems like the monarchy is like putting all this pressure on him to like join the fold or like do things their way, and he doesn't really want to do that. So him needing to again like go away to protect his family and fight against the alliance that the family has with the press.
Also thinking about Bertie having all that third house, how much of his identity was shaped by his brother.
Yeah. And then the third house ruler, I mean, they both have Jupiter ruling the third house. And it's interesting how, I don't know, it's interesting how like in Harry's chart, like William is like represented by a busted Jupiter. And I think it's really telling, like, there's somebody who like, not like, so on the one hand, Jupiter being like on the ascendant is really nice because it's like, okay, like there's like a support that happens. But like whenever I see like Jupiter or the moon in places like Capricorn, there's almost this like conditional support. As long as you follow my rules, no matter how much they change, like you'll get support. And I think that's what's happened a lot, especially like when the South Node was like rolling over these placements, or even like while it was still in the last degrees of Sag, like you could really see like the deterioration of that relationship. Whereas, I mean, the third house situation in George's chart is like a lot better because, you know, Jupiter has triplicity in Leo. It's also in the house it rejoices in the 11th whole sign house. So like, I mean, it's interesting though, because like, I don't think his brother was that well received, but I think like
His brother was popular, especially in the press. Like he was considered a heartthrob for his time.
Oh yeah, well, like he's hot, but like, and I think that kind of helped him in a sense, like, you know, fill the role or fill in the shoes, but like it's also like maybe there was this tension towards like how much can I really be like my brother, whereas like, you know, there's more of a sextile between Jupiter and Saturn in this chart, and there's actually reception. And so like, you know, it's like there's the potential for Harry and William to have like a good relationship, but it's interesting how like on Harry's end it's almost like, because Harry is the Saturn, right, like he's you know, receiving William positively, whereas like in William's chart, like there's not, like they're in aversion, like because William is in Scorpio in the 12th, and then there's that Mars like conjoined Harry, and you know, there's this like need to undermine what Harry's trying to accomplish almost. But yeah, I think more of the commonalities between these two charts like has to do with like how they connect with other charts, I think.
Even in Birdie's chart too. So you have that Jupiter representing his brother, top of the chart, right? But it's also square to Venus, which represents him. And then also, you know, I feel bad. I always feel really bad for Birdie for some reason. It just feels like his life wasn't really his for a while, or, you know, for much of his life. And I think since he has such a full second house, it almost feels like so much of his life was just kind of reinforcing to himself that he had the right to be there. Because, you know, that second house can also be a house of like, you know, developing your self-esteem, your self-worth, your self-respect, like having a sense of self and value, not only for like the stuff that you have, but for yourself. And to see it probably wasn't easy because you have the moon and Venus in detriment or in their fall, then you have Saturn in there and Uranus. Like this was not easy.
No.
At all. And like, you know, his brother had such an influence on his life because he is this third house kind of person, and his brother ditches him. Like he lived in his brother's shadow for his entire life. The cuter older brother was always the thing. He was the spare, kind of thought of as kind of this loser. And at the last minute, his brother ditches him and gives him the job that he had never intended to have. And it killed him early. Like that's really kind of twisted.
That's messed up.
It's messed up. So I hope that we don't have to see something like that again. But that to me is one of the sadder stories.
Probably not. I think the monarchy is gonna go.
Yeah. The last thing between these two that we didn't talk about is the fact that they both have the nodes in the 12th and 6th house. You know? So who rules his south node for Birdie would be Mercury and Sag.
Oh.
And then the north node ruler would be that Jupiter in Leo. So often when I read about the nodes in 6 and 12, it's like you're getting away from kind of being too much in the mix of spirituality and not being grounded. So it's like getting those dreams to kind of come down into the physical world through the 6th house. So I'm very curious how this shows up for Birdie. Maybe he had dreams of being the better sibling.
Maybe
Mercury the third.
But I know for Harry in particular, it's showing up more as like leaving these like nebulous institutions and like going out into the world and getting your hands dirty and being of service that way in a more direct way.
But I do think, that Birdie kind of like trailblazed a little bit of that. Like he was one of the kings that actually would go out and like shake hands and do the appearances. And then when they had all the bombing during World War II, he would go out like the next day and talk to his people. And that kind of endeared his people to him and to the queen, because they stayed in London and got bombed to hell. They didn't go and escape. So like that bought them a lot of goodwill kind of like later on.
Well, I'm wondering if the relationship with the press must have really started under Bertie, especially with this third house, especially with the wife also in the third house. Because I remember hearing that she had a war in the press against Wallace Simpson back in the day too.
Oh yeah.
So it's interesting that it seems to be that the mercurial types tend to do okay in these roles. So Harry, Queen Elizabeth I, and even King George VI, he is a third house sun, Mercury and Mars. So I would put him in that mercurial role, being able to communicate well with the public and speak on their terms.
Yeah, he was a very popular king. I mean, even though it did end up killing him, and I don't think he definitely didn't want it, which you can see.
Anyone else? Anything else about these two?
No.
Nothing major.
Okay. Now we see Queen Lizzie II, Lilibet, the name that has everyone in a furore. So Queen Elizabeth II was born on April 21st, 1926 at 2:40 a.m. Yes. At London, England, and she is a Capricorn rising, moon
again,
Taurus, and the moon in Leo, with Saturn in Scorpio again. Exalted Venus in Pisces. Anybody else?
All those exalted Venuses mean, or domiciled.
Yeah, Venus is doing a lot of legwork.
Venus is really helping the monarchy.
She's working overtime.
She's out here carrying them.
carrying hard. What's interesting about her chart is, and I commented on this, like, I think when I did the Pisces decan episode, that like Venus ruling the 10th whole sign house, but then also like the IC and 5th house is like, this chick really put her children and grandchildren to work to like build their brand. She did what she walked so Kris Jenner could run. Okay. Like, let me tell you, everybody like gives Kris Jenner way too much credit when it comes to using your family to build like a public facing image. Yeah, they're not doing reality TV, but they're like doing engagements, they're like sharing, inviting you into their home to like make people feel like, welcome, and kind of taking advantage of the slight blurring between public and private life. Very, very huge under her reign. And I think like she was also one of the first royals to actually give like a radio broadcast when she was a kid, like during the war. And, she did all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I mean, it's there.
What stood out about her chart? It's just like, I mean, again, showing that Cap rising with Saturn on the midheaven. I always like when you can use the age or the degree of the planet to talk about the age. So, she has that Saturn in midheaven at 24 and 25, and those are basically that's the age that she became queen. I think it's 25 when her father passed away. So she became her reputation at that age. I always think that's pretty cool. I mean, she is a 5th house Taurus sun. I didn't even recognize that at first. So just thinking about how much, like you said, Mo, how much glamour has gone into the image around this chart, this throne for her. I think she really, like you said, there was a lot of effort put into making this seem better than what it was. And I do think that Neptune in Leo was helping, sending
lot.
a square over to that midheaven and Saturn for good
I
measure.
mean, look at it freaking look at Saturn in that T square with Jupiter and Mars and Neptune. Like basically she's the apex. She and her throne are the apex of like this T square. So like if you think about the midheaven conjunct Saturn in that last decan of Scorpio, there's imagery around like building new life off of the ashes of something that decayed. So in this case, it was literally like the loss of her father. She built like her reign off of that and like made it work for her, even though it was like a tragic loss. It led to her ascension, right? But then there's this T square I noticed between like Mars, which rules her like fourth sign house, which has to do with like family, home, and then Neptune being in the eighth. So there's this need, like Neptune is very glamorous, but it's also very deceptive, right? And so that last decan of Leo is all about rallying people behind a cause. And in this case, the cause is maintaining the image of the monarchy, right? But then you have like family and possibly like not just like, her parents and like the people she's descended from, the people she lives with, but also like, extended family, which can be a very third house topic, like needing to get them all to fall in line so that they could project this image, right? And it's hard because, the people that represent family and siblings and cousins and the people you live with, they're all in that last decan of Aquarius. And so they kind of want to do what they want to do. And they kind of want to, it's not that they don't want to be there. It's just that they want to accomplish things in their own way. And they possibly wanted to like see how much they could get out of the monarchy without really like fully giving their all. Like they kind of wanted to see how much they could like extricate themselves from it. But what's interesting is that Mars and that Saturn are in mutual reception. And so at the end of the day, like, yes, she wants to give them the room to like do things their way. And like, maybe the family wants to, and like in some sense, the media as well wants to portray her in a particular light. But there's always this need to like prepare in case they want to like, I don't know, make a run for it or like find a way to, it's like one of those have your cake and eat it too things, because it's like, oh, this is what I got myself into, like what should I do, like how do I play around with this, and so yeah, no, like there's been a lot of finessing and stuff around like the family's image for sure.
Yeah, I was just thinking about that Scorpio, it's not Scorpio, that eighth house in Leo, thinking about some of the secrets that could be coming out of that house, especially because it is related to children and to sex to an extent. So it was something I was seeing, I was like, well, that's unusual. Just thinking about like Andrew and Charles, and, unfortunately they have ties to people who have relationships in entertainment and children and sex that are now also coming out in the wash, I think.
Yes, and the upcoming eclipse cycle is going to be like challenging all those planets. So
yeah, it'd be interesting to see.
Yeah, there was something. What was I seeing? Where is it coming from?
It's funny to me to see that Mars in the second, because she's known to be very stingy. Even though there's Jupiter there, I don't know, I guess it comes out, in that way, because I guess she does not like to spend money on things, but she still likes nice things. So
well, it's probably also because of her generation too, right? Because wouldn't she, is she Pluto in Cancer? Yeah. Mm-hmm. So she's coming up in, I don't know how bad it was in the UK during the 20s and 30s, but if they were struggling like the US, it would make sense that even she would be like, nope, everything has to be recycled, because they're that Great Depression generation. And also I think her mom probably had a lot of, I think there's a misconception, again, like you're saying about that family, even though they live in opulence and have power and jewelry and all this kind of stuff, I think at the core, her family, they're very like stocky peasant folk, but with titles, right? Like these are German and Scottish ancestry. These are not really known to be cultures that are very, lavish or, put on a lot of airs. So I can definitely see how that would translate to a monarchy that's a little bit more pared down. Because of the monarchies across the world, even though they're the most popular, I don't consider them the most glamorous of the royals.
No. Mm-mm.
They're not the most stylish. They're not the most glamorous. They are the most popular, but that's it.
Mm-hmm.
Very interesting.
Yeah, it is, because there are other royals that are much more like good at marketing themselves and stuff, but it seems like they're really, really good at portraying like kind of that grandness of state and that peculiar British, like we have a ceremony for everything, and we're gonna like drag out the red carpet and the jewels, and everyone's gonna fall back in love with us, which I think is that Neptune that's helping for sure.
Yeah, but once she's gone, what are they gonna do? Because it's her.
Yeah, she's really holding this up.
She's holding it all together. Really, truthfully.
Well, and that can be the trouble of having a fixed T-square in your chart on the midheaven. This idea of having too much control, or controlling too many things. She also has Pluto angular in this chart, so again, this idea of control. And I think maybe now that she's so old, it might be catching up, because, well, it's, I don't know, maybe not, because at the same time, she's also in this household run by all these courtiers and advisors. So does she ever have control? Maybe that's the big illusion. Right?
Yeah.
And maybe also Harry's exposing that, because here you have someone who says, my grandmother loves me, and yet her institution is actively attacking him. So maybe that's part of the deception. Who actually holds the power in this situation? Because it's probably not her at this point.
Oh, yeah.
Probably the whatchamacallit? What do they call it? Her secretary?
Her private secretary.
Her private secretary, probably, maybe.
Well, he's the highest ranking courtier usually, so yeah.
Because her 10th house ruler is Venus, exalted in the third, right?
Yep.
So I would think that person, whoever that person is, might have the most power around her. Or whoever is ruling the midheaven, which would be this Mars and Aquarius in the second, who would that be? Who's controlling the purse?
Yeah.
Yeah. So there's definitely something between finances and the monarchy itself in her chart that's probably going to come out fairly soon, which we know to be the case. Her coronation chart just had an 8th house year, and all that scandal about the finances of the family has been coming
offshore accounts, and then what did they just release the other week? Their spending, right? Which like didn't go down at all even after Meghan and Harry left.
It went up.
Interesting. It went up.
So I think this Neptune in the 8th house, square to the ruler of the second and square to these second house planets, are probably going to reveal a lot of these issues around the actual finances behind the throne. And because it's a T-square that is shooting off into the 5th house, it's probably going to be revealed that a lot of it was spent on frivolous pleasures, vacations, sex, kids, all sorts of 5th house stuff is going to start popping out. Anything else?
No.
Oh, yeah. Margaret!
Look at this beauty.
Look at this beauty. Princess Margaret is Elizabeth's younger sister. She was born August 21st, 1930 at 9:22 p.m. in Gilmas. Glamis or Glamis, Scotland?
Glamis, Scotland. Yeah,
Glamis,
we're probably pronouncing it incorrectly.
So sorry, Scotland. Terrible with your accents. I apologize. She is a Leo sun on the Regulus degree, Aries rising, and the moon in rulership in Cancer. So this, I think Margaret has one of the most blessed charts of this family that I have seen. She has Saturn in rulership in Capricorn. She has Jupiter in exaltation in Cancer, the moon in rulership in Cancer, Leo in rulership in its Sun in Leo in its own house, On the reckless point, Virgo, Mercury, and Venus in Libra, both in rulership.
It's crazy.
It's great. So like the thing is the chart is great on paper, but the problem with having too many planets, especially if they're in domicile, is that your life becomes very disjointed and they're not all on the same page, and like the different parts of your life are just like, I have mine, I don't care about you.
This one.
Yeah.
I'm like, I don't care. So yeah.
It sounds good in theory, but
yeah. So this is just for people who are like, oh, my planet is really not great or blah, blah, blah. It's just like no one's planets are that great, even when they are great, because you still have to learn how to use them well, right?
Yeah.
And when your planets are souped up cars, which is what they are when they are in domicile, they don't want to listen to you or anybody else.
Nope.
Like, I'm a Ferrari. Who are you, Volvo? Like, no one tells me what to do, right? And it's vroom, vroom, vroom to whatever you want to do, for better or for worse, right? So I think that's kind of what happened with Margaret. For better or for worse, she lived a very intense life, but it did end fairly early, I would say. So,
well, and it ended in tragedy. With the later half of her life, it ended in tragedy. I mean, she was an alcoholic. She had, that divorce. She went through a spate of lovers. She ended up having dementia. She was probably an alcoholic. She probably had hepatitis. I mean, it was sad.
Speaking of alcoholism, sometimes this can be a trait seen with people who are Sun Neptune. And in this case, she is a Sun Neptune. As you can see, she has a Sun at 29 Leo and is conjunct Neptune in Virgo in the next house over. So even though it's out of sign, it is still a conjunction and it's applying. So the Sun was getting closer to Neptune as she continued to grow up. I would say it looks like that fourth house is crazy. And I do think this really talks about her mother being the one who was running the show. And I think
look at the moon at the bendings. Like,
yeah. Mom was running the show. She's in the bendings. She's also conjunct Pluto. So this was a mom. I think the mom or whoever was the main paternal, maternal parent, whoever, had a lot of control in her life. A ton of control, maybe too much control. Sometimes Moon Pluto can talk about, figures manipulating the environment to maintain control. So this can show up a lot of different ways. I would just think that it was probably kind of suppressing Margaret's vivaciousness, to be honest. She was despair.
Like smothering almost, yeah.
Smothering love. Like, no, you can't do that. But this, when did Bertie stepped down in 36? So Margaret would have been about 6 years old, roughly.
When she moved to the palace, something along those lines.
So we can see here at the top of her chart, her Saturn is 5 degrees 33 seconds. So give or take, roughly, that was the shifting probably for her, because she was on the spare line, right? She was not supposed to have this kind of ranking. And even her ascendant is at 6 degrees too. So that definitely was a big change for her at that age, I would say. And it's square. So Saturn is square to that ascendant. So that change in her stats was difficult for her.
I'm also thinking about the fact that like her love life was pretty turbulent, and I feel like a lot of that is explained by Uranus opposite Venus. And so like what else is going on in this chart? Like just her being square, like, so she's Mars and her sibling Liz would be that Mercury in Virgo. And even though like reception wise, like Liz wants to help her or like, like encourage her to go in a certain way, like something about Mars just like doesn't always want to get on board with that. So there was a lot of tension probably between them in terms of like the focus on service or like doing things that make the family look good rather than just doing whatever she felt like doing.
I also think there was a fair amount of mental tension for her too.
Yeah.
just between those two planets, right? And this showed up a couple of times in a few charts, this Mars Mercury. I know William and Harry both have it too. Harry has the square, William has the trine, yeah, and she has the square too. So again, it's kind of interesting that both the spares have this square between their Mercury and Mars and having to fight with their sibling.
Yeah, and this is another like tense sibling rivalry type thing, because like, I mean, I guess you could see that with Liz's chart as well, because she had the Saturn Jupiter square. But like, again, there was the reception, but it's interesting how it plays out in both charts, where Liz is the one who's like receptive, whereas like, you know, the other one is just kind of like almost depending on the other planet to receive them, right? Yeah.
Okay, what else about this chart? I mean, she was always going to be a little bit of an upstart, right? You have Uranus and Aries in the first house. So I think she was supposed to be someone to help shape the family up, but how well received it was and how successful she was is the next question, right? So I feel like she wanted to introduce new ideas, especially because she is that Mars and Gemini in the third house. And I think her ideas could have been practically implemented because that Mars and Gemini is ruled by that Mercury in Virgo in the sixth. And I think that's where the issue was. This is a talented chart, but it didn't have an outlet for that talent. You know, because remember, if you watch The Crown, for me, I always got a lot of pleasure out of the times where Elizabeth expected Margaret to fail, but Margaret ended up doing fine. And I feel like that was the issue between those two sisters. The spare was expected to fail and wasn't used to the best of her abilities, essentially. And because of that, she fell into that Neptune Sun dynamic of, well, you know, depression, because all that anger. If you're a Mars and Gemini, you need things to do, things to engage your mind, conversation, activity, ideas. And if you're not getting any of that, you're bound to kind of turn it inward and attack yourself, right? So unfortunately, I think that's what happened.
It's that escapism.
And that moon too is pretty intense. When you're a moon Pluto person, that's already intensity. And technically that moon is also square to Uranus. So there is some emotional instability and conflict going on for her, for sure. And I'm wondering, because you know that the planet that's in the bends, you know, a lot of your fate is tied to that planet, because depending on how you use it or decide to go about living it, it dictates things. So for her, that moon in Cancer in the fourth house had a lot of power in terms of her path. She's a first house, and it's interesting between her and her sister too. Elizabeth is a south node in the first house, and she's a north node in the first house. So again, very different energy, where Elizabeth is supposed to be selfless and kind of give of herself to others. Margaret was here to be more independent and stop relying so much on others. And with the moon in between that, there was some emotional dynamic with her family. So we know it kind of turned out with the marriage that couldn't happen. Right. So that was blocked. And I think that was, how old was she then? Probably around.
She was young. I think they like got together like in the early 20s, and you know, she had to wait till she was 25 in order to marry on her own.
Well,
and then that didn't work out either.
So Margaret was allowed to marry at 25, right? Her moon is at 25 degrees. She was unable to marry the person that she wanted. And that decision point is what set off everything else between the square of her nodes, right? And that's herself, her relationships, and her family, and her position in the world. So I think that moon, her being blocked, I think was a major problem in the long run.
The Mars too is at that 25. So I would imagine she was quite angry.
Yeah. So 25 and 26 was a big time for her. And it did not go to plan. And it was partially because her sibling blocked her.
With Mars in that third,
And
Literally,
from there, it seemed like things kind of unraveled to her detriment, unfortunately. Now, she did have she had a good life. She got married, she had kids, but we don't know what would have been had she married the first person and had more autonomy in her life. Because I think that was the main problem. She's here to learn how to be independent. And if you have someone actively telling you no and blocking you, that kind of disrupts some things. So I like Margaret.
I'm also just thinking of her Mars in that third decan of Gemini in the third house. I'm thinking about how, like, apparently she burned some of the letters that Diana gave to the queen so people wouldn't find them. So, like, she had this, like, duty to the family and their reputation. And so, despite, like, you know, being told no and being told to do things a certain way.
Yeah, because she could have run off. She could have been like her uncle. But I think at that point in time, her uncle's activities and actions were such a dark cloud over the family that she couldn't, because it would have been more scandal and uproar, right? So.
But yeah, like, she was in kind of that same position where her wanting to marry Peter Townsend was like another constitutional crisis. It's just another pattern repeating of the person that you want to marry, causing just tremendous drama within the actual, like, governing of a country.
Well, right. So what is it? Venus is the ruler of her seventh house. Venus is opposite Uranus and squared to Jupiter. So yeah, unfortunately. But did it have to? Did it have to make upheaval? That's where I question, because it's just like, your sister is technically running the show. Why can't she make a new set of rules?
Because is she really running the show?
Yeah. No. She's not really. That's the thing. Yeah.
So unfortunately, Margaret did suffer for that. But in another life, I think she would have made a wonderful actress. She would have been really talented at that. They should have used her a lot more for diplomatic stuff. I think she would have been really good. Anything else about Miss Margaret?
No.
Okay.
I just like this picture of the sisters. Look how young they are.
They're so young.
Yeah. Yeah. Also, I want a coat like that. Okay. Moving on.
So we did one more against Elizabeth and Harry and their similarities. Is this the right chart? Yeah. Yes.
Yeah. Same rising.
Oh
same,
no,
like...
this is the wrong chart. My bad, guys. This is actually Queen Elizabeth I.
Nah.
Mercury caught me in the end.
We already did that.
I already did this. I'm so sorry.
No, that's okay.
Can we bring up the other one?
Yeah.
Let me see. Can I do that?
You can see it here, and then I can just go back if you want.
Okay. Yeah, that's fine.
So you can see that. Just like, remember this.
Yeah. They both have Cap rising, Saturn on the midheaven. What else?
Venus in domicile.
Venus in
or
domicile.
exaltation.
It's that Venus again. I'm telling you, Venus is like,
Carrying,
she really. I hope that they're paying her.
Paying who? Venus?
Venus. I hope they're like sacrificing to Venus on the daily.
Paying the toll.
I'm sure there's an altar set up. Was there much between him and his grandmother? I mean, his moon is in her sun sign.
They have more like synastry type stuff. Like, that's why I think they actually do like each other and get along.
Yeah. Yeah. Which doesn't surprise me at all. Like,
yeah, they do seem to be pretty close. But
yeah, let me see. I don't even know, because I was thinking of this one and I was like, did they really have that many similarities? Margaret
between William and Margaret? No, it's not that I saw.
Yeah.
Not that I saw, but like,
Let's see.
I mean, they both have, again, the exalted third house ruler going on. Kind of working not necessarily against them, but like doing a little better than them. Kind of like having to compete with them. There's that, like we mentioned earlier, the Mars Mercury square, which seems to be like very apt for quarreling siblings.
Yeah.
Oh, it's been passed down
For sure.
past this particular branch. So hopefully we'll get to look at the charts of the current royal, the youngest royal children, and we'll see that same Mars Mercury stuff coming up again.
I hope not.
It's in the chart of Archie and Lily. The Munchkins.
Oh no.
But it might be, you know, I'm sure their parents will work overtime to avoid quarreling siblings in their households. Just based upon their own individual histories, I'm sure they will put the kibosh on it.
I hope so.
Oh God, the crown. We think that like it's low-key cursed, but
it's possible.
Anyway, like there's just too much of this drama for it not to.
Well, you could think about also, where'd you get all these jewels from? Who made it? Did you pay them? Did you thank them? Did you?
No.
Did you think of it? Did you think anything of them? Did you think they were cursing your stuff while they're making it? They probably were.
Probably.
They're probably weaving all sorts of magic into that. A pox upon your house.
Yeah.
So never underestimate the power of magic. So, do you want to take this part away, Kelly, since you are the historian of Athelstan?
Oh, well, I was just trying to figure out, like, who exactly was the first king of England, which, you know, is not actually an easy question to answer, because you would think that would be something that would be, but the concept of England is like shifting and nebulous across time. What constitutes England? How much of England do you have to conquer to be the king? But a lot of historians seem to agree that Athelstan was probably the first king of England. And this is his coronation chart, because we don't have a birth time for him because they did not keep those kinds of records back then. But we do know that he was crowned on this day in a ceremony created by the Archbishop of Canterbury, which is the same dude, I think, that does it now. So it kind of felt like, okay, this may be jiving along some of the same kind of lines. So this is really old, September 4th, 925. We just did a noon chart because we actually don't know the time. And so this was probably the first king of England who drove out the Vikings and conquered the Scots. So it's generally considered like maybe the entry point for first king.
What do I see? Mars square Mercury.
What do I see? Scorpio.
What do I see? Virgo. Oh my goodness.
Those Virgo placements.
Virgo. So there's definitely something to be said about Virgos and the English crown.
I mean,
and Venus in the 10th house. Or somewhere near it.
Yeah, like the reason that I like the noon chart is because if you look at a lot of these latest iterations of the royals, like there seems to be a lot of placements like in those like middle and last decans of Scorpio, but also in that middle decan and last decan of Virgo that seems to be really repeated a lot. Like just look at the charts of you know, the Queen, Harry, I mean, I guess Charles to some extent, like, and a bunch of other people. The synastry with this chart is just actually kind of crazy.
Saturn rising, Mars rising.
I mean, again, also, Saturn with Mars, like siblings, like dueling. Come on.
Dueling siblings, literally baked into the chart. Fixed ankles, which is also maybe why I like a noonish type chart, because it's like built to last.
You have Chiron in the 3rd house too, so again kind of reiterating this wound around siblings. North node in the 6th. Okay. So about that service, because remember back in the day, to be king, like this was not just I'm king. Like it was like, no, you're king, and if you don't king right, we'll sacrifice you.
Literally.
We will sacrifice you so that we can eat. So I definitely see how that North Node in the 6th could definitely be like, yeah, but you're going to be working for the people, right? This is not necessarily about you. You might have power, but this is about service, which is something that we do so much.
Yeah, you have to protect them.
Yeah, you have to fight to protect people.
Yeah. So I like that.
So, so you can definitely see the signatures. Like, I don't know. That's why I kind of just liked this chart a little bit.
And I think Elizabeth's moon in Leo is sitting right on the Venus of this chart.
It sure is.
Yeah. I think Megan's sun might be sitting there too, right?
It is.
You can't make this up. You can't make it up.
And then a bunch of people's risings are also sitting on that Venus as well.
So when people think that these things are mistakes, this is like, no, there's no way that Meghan Markle or anyone could have accidentally married into this family. It's just not going to happen. If your astrology doesn't fit in, it's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Just not there.
And then I think the next chart was the William the Conqueror chart.
Alrighty.
And I think they just used William the Conqueror because they started like numbering the kings, and they would say like, oh, okay, you're James whatever, Edward the whatever, and then they would say Edward the Third since the conquest, which they meant William the Conqueror. And so everyone started timing everything to when William conquered. So I think it just became kind of like a thing. So we can just look at both of these.
More Virgo.
Yeah, I mean the synastry between both charts is interesting because Pluto was on the moon of that other chart. And then like the moon is at the very end of Pisces. So it's like a weird lunar return meets like Pluto. Jupiter is also returning, and you guys will quickly notice that this is a Saturn-Jupiter conjunction period. And
that sounds familiar.
Yeah, and again, Saturn-Jupiter periods are associated with the rise and fall of kings and things like that. And this is like a conjunction taking place near the North Node. So,
but
yeah,
it's funny. The South Node is on the moon, and the moon is controlling the 4th house again. So, kind of that sacrifice of family for this active service.
Yeah, I mean, even just the illusion around like the need for a conquest, right? And the need to like have this united England or whatever, because like the moon also represents the people. And like when you're doing mundane, like it represents like the people. And so like this like I guess this easily represents like people who were conquered by like an invading people and forced to adopt their customs just to preserve the illusion of like a kingdom, which is very 3rd decan of Pisces. Which is interesting because if you take this as one of the charts for the UK, Neptune is going over like these degrees in Pisces like right now and for the next couple of years. So maybe like the sense of, I guess, investment in the illusion of being a part of this like kingdom is probably gonna like dissolve pretty fast.
It's up for review. Let's see. Let's see if they pass the test.
Also Venus in this chart is being transited by Pluto.
It is. And guess what's happening at the end of the year? Venus retrograde in that 3rd decan of Capricorn.
And this Venus rules over the situation.
It costs too fucking much. We need to get rid of it.
Can we afford a monarchy?
No, that's the question. Especially if like more of these scandals around like, what Prince Andrew may or may not have been doing with Epstein like comes out, which is a very Venus Pluto topic. Like we're gonna be like questioning, can we afford a monarchy? Like, is this worth the money?
And then also that 7th house, if you think about, well, what is this doing for us? Are we getting anything out of it? Is this a fair relationship? And then probably also think about, well, are these people actually diplomats? Are they
Yeah.
getting us things? Is this a relationship that's actually giving us what we need?
Yeah, and how it affects our foreign standing, because the seventh house in mundane charts can be other countries, but especially like those you are like either rivaled to or interacting with a lot. So there could be stuff like that. It's like maybe we should model ourselves after other countries that don't have this. Like, how will this help us financially?
Especially because, with all the tours that the royals have been doing lately that haven't been received well, they're not doing their diplomatic duty to make things easier for the country, right? Scotland's like, we might want to break up with you. Don't send him back here. Like, don't do that.
Oh, I just also noticed the Mercury Saturn mutual reception between Capricorn and Virgo. And maybe some of that's speaking to more of the service type things.
Okay. Well, I definitely think this is something to watch, because here we go.
These are the two kings, so that's Athelstan and William the Conqueror, but they, interestingly enough, both of their parentages are questioned, and they probably both weren't like slated to be monarchs at all. William the Conqueror for sure was like, one of his names was William the Bastard, because he was an illegitimate child. And Ethelstan's parentage is debated. It's possible his mother was also a concubine. So they were both kings who probably were not supposed to be kings.
So were they spares?
Yeah, William had had a few brothers. Athelstan, I think, also did. And so it was more common in those days to let the brothers battle it out. Like literally. Like,
no, yeah.
Who
and
can
like
kill
in a lot of cultures, it's like, yes, there's like an inheritance to it, but like you also have to go through trials to earn the role. And if you can't pass the test, it's going to the next eligible person.
The one that probably killed you.
Yeah, unfortunately. So, thinking about that today, this whole idea of the heir and the spare. I think ultimately we've discovered that I don't think it has ever kind of fallen in the UK's favor to have this heir and spare thing, because it usually
dynamic is not working.
It's not working because it seems like the spare is usually better suited for the position.
Yeah.
And that might be because they have not been told their entire lives that they're special, and they actually had to earn some skills and talents of their own. And usually those talents are probably, well suited for the role of a ruler. Now, the heir may get all that attention, but none of the Saturn rigor to really help them out, possibly. So when we often fear Saturn, I don't want to work hard. Well, Saturn will make you, an authority. He will make you someone worth listening to. So maybe that's something to think about with Harry's Saturn rising and William's more Jupiter one.
Yeah, it's like how we kind of notice as astrologers that people that have, planets in detriment or fall oftentimes have to work and it actually can be like turn those into their advantage, whereas sometimes you have blessed placements, it doesn't always work out because you haven't worked for it. And when it doesn't work out for you, you kind of just give up. It's like,
Something to think about, especially with Jupiter's, Harry's Jupiter in Capricorn, right? Rising. Technically that's not a great placement, but here he is being this Jupiter that's very practical, earthy, and grounded that people are connected to.
Yeah. I think some of that also has to do with the fact that Jupiter is also in its own decan, and that decan of Capricorn is about like assessing your location to see if it's worth building foundations on, or if you need to pick up and go somewhere else. And I think if he stayed there doing the same things, like it wouldn't have worked out for him. But he picked up, went somewhere else, and is reaping the benefits. So
congrats. We will continue to watch. We will continue to track with our astrology charts and see what happens next. but I hope this was a lot of fun. Ladies, do you want to tell the audience where they can find you and keep up with you?
So I am Austral Tour on Twitter. I have a podcast called the Fixed Astrology Podcast, and right now we're doing a series on the decans, along with some other fun episodes that we have in the pipeline. You can probably find bios to my Instagram and all this other stuff through my link tree, which is linked to my Twitter page.
Awesome.
You can find me on Twitter at glazebrookgirl. So I was going to say do my email, just glazebrookgirl. You'll find a link to my website there. I don't mess with the other socials, so you won't find me there.
Yes. Awesome. Makes sense.
I can only have one.
I understand. I'm probably going to be that way too pretty soon. And you can find me at jsoabove on Twitter. You can find my website at soabove.com. You can find my podcast at Stars on Fire, someplace everywhere.
And support her on Patreon.
Support us on Patreon. And I think that's it. So let us know if you enjoyed this. Give us a thumbs up, a like, a subscribe if you want to. And if you want us to do more of this royal series, we have plenty of content. So please, so much content we would love to discuss. So let us know if this is something that you like, and we would love to continue doing it if so. Anything else, ladies, before we wrap up?
No.
All right. Well, it's been a pleasure. Thank you so much. And until next time. Peace.